Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old Union has come in here to dwell.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
Hello, Tennessee Valley. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller, and we are broadcasting live online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio Studio in Huntsville, Alabama. Today, an Alabama state senator doesn't want your child to have health care. Tommy Tuberville continues to scold Alabamians, and a rail strike is back on the table. All that and more on today's program. If you want to be part of the show, we've got a phone number and the line is open. You can call or text 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can also leave a voicemail or send us a message all throughout the week. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap here on the radio, or if you want to just see what we're up to throughout the week, then you can find us anywhere you find anything online. We're on YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, newly on Twitch at TVLR FM. On Twitch at TVLR FM. And I think we're live on Twitch right now.
We're not today, but next week we will be.
Next week we will be. Okay. So follow that if you're a Twitch watcher. Just a reminder, your support helps us stay on the air. Our largest single source of funding comes directly from our listeners. So if you want to become a sustaining member of the program, you want to make a one-time donation, buy our stickers, you can go to our website. That's tvlr.fm. You can make a donation at tvlr.fm/donate. You can go to our store at tvlr.fm/store. You can also become a patron at patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. If you're a member of a union, definitely think about getting your local to sponsor the show. You can reach out to me for more details on that. And so with that, let's just go ahead and jump into this first. Strom in the chat says, or as Larry King called it, the tweeter. Good morning, Jared, Strom, Patrick, David, everybody in the chat. We appreciate y'all joining us. Don't think we have anybody in the Facebook chat yet, but I'm sure that Joe and Mel will be joining shortly. And yeah, just don't hesitate to call in. We got a couple of really good comments on our YouTube channel last week. Folks that had some really interesting stories about their union and their workplace. And so I told them last week to definitely feel free to call in sometime today. So would love to hear from them for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Keep the comments coming. Keep the text and the phone calls coming. And I'm just going to take a second to just wish everyone happy holidays, and I hope everyone's had a great Thanksgiving. I am very thankful for all of you who support this program, whether you are a regular listener or you contribute financially or you have shared this program or turned other people onto it. Really appreciate it. Very thankful for the community we have built around the Valley Labor Report, and of course all the sponsors and donors and guests. We've had some amazing guests. So, just feeling really thankful for that, and thankful for my union for giving me some work last night.
There you go. There you go. Awesome. Yeah, so it's funny that you mentioned having to work last night, till almost midnight or something, because to hear Tommy Tuberville tell it, Alabamians just aren't working anymore. Nobody wants to work anymore, actually.
So they say.
So they say. So
every time I show up at work, I'm like, wait, I thought no one was going to be here.
I thought I was going to be the only one. Or wait a second. Why am I even at work? I thought that I could just stay home and get this huge government check.
Yeah. Apparently we've been missing out. Like,
apparently,
the government is just cutting out checks, making it rain, and we are nowhere to be found.
Left and right. The government, not only the government, but this is a totally different thing. But apparently, like George Soros is out here funding all sorts of stuff, and we are still nothing.
Yeah,
from George Soros.
I can report today, George Soros has given $0 to the Valley Labor Report. Or and to us personally. Mm-hmm. So I know that's a common concern out there, especially on WVNN.
Yeah, it's really a shame. Really a shame.
So if y'all know George Soros,
put in a word for us.
Tell him to chip in a few bucks.
But
it's Thanksgiving.
So, Tuberville last week, he was in AL.com lecturing Alabamians about our will to work. This is an elaboration that he made on some comments to the media a couple weeks earlier, and we responded to this at the time. He said, quote, "What's happening in our country right now, we're getting too many takers in our country. Too many people to take a check, and they don't want to give back. They don't want to go to work. We've got Generation X and these millennials. We've got to get them to understand that you have to tote your own load." And just like like the last time, you weren't here actually, Adam, when we covered these comments first. But lest you reckon that he's got this weird axe to grind against Generation X, it was actually Generation Z, that teenagers, literally,
the kids of Generation X.
The oldest Gen Z people are now 23, 24, and he's already wanting to lecture them about not working enough. And this is like the oldest Generation Z people are just getting out of college. Like most Generation Z people are still in high school, and Tommy Tuberville, he meant to scold them about not working while they're in high school, right?
Hyundai's probably hiring.
Right, yeah. Hyundai's probably hiring. You say Hyundai really weird, but yeah, they're probably hiring.
They probably are, but I don't know, 18, 17, that's a little old for them.
Yeah, it's a little old for Hyundai. But he said, then he later elaborated on those comments to another media, to like WAFF, I think, said, quote, "We're getting too many takers in our country. They'd rather take a government check," which like Adam and I said, we're not, I don't know how people are getting these apparently, but apparently a lot of people are. Apparently it's just out there. So those were just kind of one-off comments that he made to the media. And so last week he really dug in. He sat down, he put on his thinking cap, and he sat down at his desk and he penned an article, probably, the most concentration that he has spent on a single task in a long time. I don't
or
know.
at least someone in his office.
I was about to say, who are we kidding? He didn't write this, obviously. This was some 17-year-old staffer that he has. The article is titled "Big Government is Suffocating American Businesses." And you can probably guess the through line, right? The through line is that you greedy, no good, lazy Alabamians, you just ain't working enough, and you just ain't working hard enough, because the government is just giving you too much damn money. That's what he thinks about you, and that's what he thinks about us, and that's what he thinks about the people that elected him, right? That's what he thinks about the people from the state that he is representing, because he was specifically addressing this to Alabamians. That's what he thinks about us. And now, look, of course, this is a silly argument, especially now, because we're about a year after the last of the COVID support, which all of these people are pointing to. We're a year after all of that has expired.
Right.
And we'll get into that, and we'll lay that out, in more detail. But first, I just want to soak in the irony of somebody like Tuberville. Somebody like Tuberville lecturing Alabamians about hard work. Because we're not the ones that got millions with an S of public dollars to quit our jobs. That was Tommy Tuberville when he got $5 million to quit as the head coach of Auburn. We do not have retirement payouts above the median income. Do you know how much money he makes, Adam, from his pension from Auburn?
I did not realize this until we did this article and you pointed that out. That's wild.
He gets almost $70,000 a year from Auburn as a pension because he worked there for 10 years. $70,000 is like 1.5 times the median salary in the state of Alabama. Like, that's how much money, that is 50% more than the average Alabamian makes for working a full week of work, and he just gets it sitting on his ass. $70,000 a year. $70,000 a year for literally doing nothing, because this is his pension, and that's after he got $5 million to, again, do nothing. To quit.
And there are very, very few education employees in the state of Alabama who are making a retirement income anywhere close to that. Even probably most superintendents and principals.
Who have been in the system
25,
for
30
25,
years.
30, 40, 50 years. And we're not, working people aren't getting these type of, even working people, so few working people are getting retirement pensions for a whole career at a place that are that lucrative, much less, a retirement pension that is from having worked somewhere for 10 years. That's Tommy Tuberville. We, working Alabamians, we did not say that a near $200,000 salary is so little as to disincentivize us from doing our jobs. That's Tommy Tuberville when he shot down the idea of a stock trading ban for Congress. If you'll remember, we also covered this. There was a push among Democrats, and then it was killed by Nancy Pelosi, for reasons that you can probably understand, because she, just like Tommy Tuberville, is making a whole lot of money off of those tips that she's getting in Congress. But Tommy Tuberville shot down the idea when asked about it because he said it would disincentivize people from going to Congress. Can you believe that? Congress people make $175,000 a year.
Which is better than the vast majority of Alabamians will ever make in a year.
And now, of course, the argument is that, okay, they've got a, I don't have a problem necessarily with them making $175,000 or even $200,000 or even $225,000. They do have to, and especially people that live in like New York or California, they have to have two residences, and in places like New York or California, they've got to have two residences in like the most expensive districts in the country, right? So, $200,000, it's not unreasonable, but it is certainly not so little as to disincentivize somebody.
Right. There's plenty of reasons why someone may not want to serve in Congress, but, surely it's not the salary.
Yeah.
If it's the salary, then that's not the kind of person we want in Congress to begin with.
Exactly. But that's the kind of person that Tommy Tuberville is.
Right.
That's the kind of person that Tommy Tuberville is, because he just basically said it. Like, if he wasn't talking about himself, who was he talking about? So he basically just admitted that if he was not able to make millions of dollars off of stock tips while he's representing us, that he wouldn't want to represent us. It's not lucrative enough for somebody like Tommy Tuberville.
And you watch. I feel like he isn't going to run for another term. I think he's going to cash in on this term.
Nah, I think he'll keep doing it because he's making millions of dollars. He violated the Stock Act with $1 million. It was like $894,000 worth of trades that were just in violation of the Stock Act.
That's big money.
That's big money that was traded against the law. That's not even, who knows how much he's trading like within the realm of the law. But he traded almost $1 million against the law, illegally, right? And, so he's making a lot of money off of these tips. And he was actually, I think, the most prolific trader in the Senate. There was not a single other person. And, of course, he beat the market, right? Of course he beat the market. But it's not like he was doing, insider trading or anything like that. Of course not.
Of course not. No, never.
So that wasn't us, right? Working Alabamians, you give us $200,000, you give us $100,000 a year. That is plenty to incentivize us to do our jobs, right? But not Tommy Tuberville. Not Tommy Tuberville. And that's the irony of this thing. That's the irony of somebody like Tommy Tuberville lecturing us about our will to work. Because every day in the state of Alabama, tens of thousands of teachers get up and go to work for less than a fourth of what the senator makes. Some teachers are going to work for $30,000, $35,000 a year. I know somebody working for the state mental health department, taking care of literally mentally ill children in our state schools for $37,000 a year.
Right.
And this person gets up every single day and does it. Every single day. She gets up and goes to take care of the children who are literally the most difficult to take care of for $37,000 a year. Volunteer firefighters across the state do the job for free to give back to the community. Municipal employees, we covered this a couple months ago in Selma, are working for as little as $9 an hour to keep our municipalities running. Meanwhile, if Tuberville isn't able to get millions of dollars from stock trades, he implied that he wouldn't put in the work in D.C. to represent us. And yet he is scolding us about our will to work. I mean, could you imagine being somebody like that? Being somebody who is just making money off of money, not off of work.
Right. Not
off of work. He's making money off of money, which, we can put aside the conversation about whether or not it's legitimate to make money off of money. I think that probably you can guess some of our feelings about people who make money off of money, but let's just set that aside. It is true that people who make money off of money are not working to make the money, right?
Right. I mean,
it's working people.
There's a fundamental difference between going to work and selling your labor and your time in exchange for a wage or a salary,
right,
versus numbers on a spreadsheet that grow.
The number gets bigger. The number getting bigger. That's the work that he does. The work that he does is he just has a spreadsheet and the number gets bigger.
Right.
The number gets bigger. And he is scolding us about our will to work. I mean, just the gall of it. But look, I want to be fair to the arguments as well. I want to be fair to the arguments because the arguments don't depend on the messenger. Maybe it's possible that even though he is a total hypocrite in giving Alabamians this message that we're lazy, good for nothing, greedy, no count, welfare queens, it's possible that even though he's a total hypocrite in giving us that message, that maybe the message is true, right? I could imagine a scenario in which like a preacher is talking about the importance of fidelity and saying you shouldn't cheat on your wife, and then he goes and cheats on his wife, but that doesn't make you still shouldn't cheat on your wife even though the person telling you not to cheat on your wife was doing it himself, right? We can imagine scenarios like this where a hypocritical person tells you a true message. So let's look at the arguments. Here's something from his article. Quote, "Our economy is in a perilous position. Job creators face a workforce shortage and an inflation crisis at the same time, all while trying to recover from 2 years of forced shutdowns. The federal government's spending addiction and rapid expansion of entitlement programs has made the cost of doing business unaffordable and decimated the will to work." end quote. Now, obviously, the idea that we went through, especially in Alabama, but frankly in anywhere in the country, even in the strictest places like New York or DC or LA or wherever, the idea that anywhere in the country went through 2 years of shutdowns or anything even close to it is absurd. That is a silly, silly, silly idea.
Right.
And the idea that got printed in AL.com, when it is just so factually untrue, it is such, it's bizarre. It's bizarre that he was able to print that because it's just factually not true. And we mentioned this earlier, and we're going to dig into it now, the idea that public support for working people that expired over a year ago is the reason for today's quote-unquote labor shortage is just as absurd, right? Let's look at each of the programs. Working people got some amount of support from unemployment stimulus that ended in Alabama over a year and a half ago. A year and a half ago, in June of 21. A year and a half ago, this ended. A couple of stimulus checks, the last of which was similarly given out a year and a half ago, and the expanded child tax credit, which ended nearly a year ago. Working people got some amount of support from those programs. Instead of this support fostering laziness, though, these policies kept us out of a recession.
Or at least a worse recession than what we're currently experiencing.
It's just impossible. It's impossible to argue that the economy would have been in better shape if millions of people who were out of work at the beginning of the pandemic got nothing. It's impossible. It's impossible to make that argument. You can't. It's a nonsensical argument. The stimulus checks gave working people some breathing room. And thanks to the expanded child tax credit, child poverty was cut in half. And folks weren't just frittering the stuff away, right? The most common reported uses of those child tax payments were for basic needs, including food, which was 65% of respondents, utilities and telecommunications, which was 40% of respondents, rent and mortgage, which was 39% of respondents, and clothing, which is 34% of respondents. And these people, which is the whole argument in this piece, right, is that working people stopped working because we got this support. But the evidence, in fact, shows the opposite. The St. Louis Federal Reserve found in their study of the child tax, the expanded child care tax credit, that, quote, the rates of parents reporting that they were unemployed because they had to care for children substantially decreased after the CTC began, from 26% to 19.9%. That means that of the 26% of parents who were unemployed because they had to take care of children, a full 20% of that group rejoined the workforce for whatever reason, presumably because they were able to pay for childcare, and that was enough for them to be able to go out and get a job.
Right. I mean, because working parents have, all parents, but parents of working class background, we have to do the math. And we have to figure out, does it cost more to put my child in daycare than I'll actually bring home in wages?
Right.
That's a reality that millions of families have to face every day.
Right. Additionally, from this article from the study from the Federal Reserve, the researchers found that families making $50,000 or less per year in income actually saw their self-employment rate increase by 2.9 percentage points following the CTC payments. They note that, quote, if this trend continues, which it did not, because politicians like Tommy Tuberville decided that working parents don't deserve this support. They note that, quote, if this trend continues, it could indicate that the CTC is encouraging low-income households to pursue self-employment to make ends meet, entrepreneurship, innovation, right? And this is the stuff that we're supposed to want. Innovation, entrepreneurship, starting your own business. People were able to do this because of the breathing room that they were able to get.
How many people took classes and took courses online and added certificates to their resume? I mean,
yeah,
right? People by and large did what...
People got more skills.
Right. They did the sorts of things folks advised them to do. Get more skills, explore new markets in the job market, broaden their resume. Folks were doing that.
Yeah. And so
It's funny how when you have like a little bit of breathing room
Right.
and you actually can afford to pay your bills from week to week and you're not on the edge of precarity and desperation, you can actually do some things that might constitute self-improvement.
Yeah. But due to politicians' refusal to retain the expanded child tax credit, child poverty is now as high as it was before the pandemic. And on the unemployment stimulus, despite some governors, like our own Kay Ivey, cutting their citizens off from the much-needed support as quickly as possible back in June, before it ended for everybody, I think in September, is that when it was, or December? There hasn't been any evidence to suggest that ending that unemployment stimulus, that ending those policies more quickly led to a reduced unemployment rate in the states that took that tact. There's no evidence to suggest that states saw a further reduced unemployment rate from ending the unemployment stimulus early. And that's not me quoting from some lefty journal. Like we could find those. There are, lefty think tanks that put out that research and showed that. But that's not even just coming from them. This is coming from the Wall Street Journal. From an article in the Wall Street Journal, quote, states that ended enhanced federal unemployment benefits early have so far seen about the same job growth as states that continued offering the pandemic-related extra aid, according to a Wall Street Journal analysis and economists. According to the conservative, business-minded Wall Street Journal, this did not reduce unemployment. So certainly at the very least, after we've gone through all of that, at the very least, we should be able to say that the, quote, decimation of Alabamians', quote, will to work can simply not be attributed to these policies more than a year since they've expired. It's just impossible to believe that. It's impossible to believe that. But then, even just taking, okay, maybe that's not the cause of it, but maybe it's still the case that Alabamians just hate working and we're not working. Maybe that's the case. But no, that idea is ludicrous. The idea that our will to work is in jeopardy is ridiculous. In Alabama, the unemployment rate is lower than it was before the pandemic. The state's labor force participation rate is as high as it was before the pandemic. Similarly, get this, and I didn't realize that this was the case before I started researching for this article. We responded to this in AL.com, and you should find the article and you should share it as well. But I figured this out when we were working on this article. The working age labor force participation rate, which is just the labor force participation rate of people between the ages of 25 and 54. What is the rate of people within that age bracket, which is working age, that are working? That labor force participation rate is as high as it's been in 20 years when it hit its all-time high. It was like 20 years ago when it hit its all-time high. We are basically near the all-time high of working age people working in the United States of America. More working age people are working today than when Senator Tommy Tuberville was a young man. He grew up in a time where 20% fewer working age people were at work than today. And that's after a battered workforce was reduced by COVID deaths and disability. I think that people really just forget that 1 million more people died 1 million, more than a million. How much is it? 1.3, 1.4, 1.5 million more people have died than would have otherwise been the case over the pandemic.
Right, and we also have to account for the fact that as many as 4 million people are out of work due to long COVID and COVID lasting impacts. That's a lot of people who otherwise would be working, but who through disability and illness are not.
Yeah, exactly. And we are doing this. More of us are working. Many of us are working longer hours. We're doing this for less money. Real wages are falling right now because of inflation, but profits are way above inflation. Raises for CEOs are way above inflation. We've talked about this, about how at the paper mill down in South Alabama, where WestRock has locked their union employees out, the CEO there got a 300% raise. I have never, and I don't expect to ever, I very much doubt that I will ever in my lifetime see a 300% year-over-year raise. But millionaires do all the time. Billionaires do all the time. But not working people. But we're still getting up and going to work. We're still getting up and making the state run. So that brings up the question then. If he is so obviously wrong as he is, and if he is so obviously wrong about every single point that he tried to make, from the reason that our will to work is decimated, from our will to work being decimated, from government handouts being detrimental to the unemployment rate, on every single one of these things, he is just wrong. He's just objectively, demonstrably wrong. If that's the case, then why is he writing articles lecturing us? Why is he writing articles scolding Alabamians, scolding working Alabamians, instead of writing op-eds, let's say, blasting Warrior Met for not giving coal miners who want to work a fair contract? Why isn't he blasting WestRock for locking out its union workforce that want to work and not giving them a fair contract? Why isn't he blasting Amazon and Starbucks for firing Alabamians who want to work for having opinions that they don't like? That opinion being that they want to unionize. If he wants able-bodied people who want to work to be able to work, then why is he trying to squeeze us? Why is he trying to put pressure on us to do more for less instead of telling our bosses to pay up? It's because, folks, he isn't on our side. He's on their side. And it's helpful for them. It's helpful for the people at the top if we're all tilted at windmills. If we're all attacking and being mad at these imaginary lazy people, if we're mad at them instead of being mad at folks that are actually making the decisions that are keeping us down, it's good for those folks at the top. And that's why he's doing it. He wants you to get mad at all these imaginary lazy people that are not going to work, that are just taking government benefits, instead of being upset at your boss, instead of being upset at the system that allows millionaires and billionaires to see things like 300% raises while we're taking 5%, 10% pay cuts in real terms. Because if you get mad at that, that might be a problem for people like Tuberville. He ain't on your side, folks. He ain't on your side. Adam, you got anything else to add to that, or you want to go to a break?
No, I think we said it all in the editorial, but I do want to point people to that. Working people should reject lectures from millionaires, I believe, is the final title AL.com came up with.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful that AL.com did publish it. I think we noticed that we have about as many shares on our article as old Senator Tommy does on his original op-ed.
Yeah.
And that's with AO.com not promoting it at all. So not bad. Definitely encourage folks to check it out. I'll drop a link in the chat. But it was a pleasure to work with you to respond to Tommy Tuberville and the complete asinine garbage he was spewing on AO.com.
Yeah.
He proved absolutely nothing. He lied, and he revealed himself to be what we always suspected he was, which is on the side of bosses, on the side of the wealthy, and completely opposed to us regular working class folks.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, let's go ahead and take a break, and we're going to be talking about an Alabama state senator who doesn't want your child to have health care on the other side. So, oh, God, stay tuned.
Hometown Action is a grassroots organization building a multiracial working class movement for racial, gender, economic, and environmental justice in Alabama's rural communities. We stand in solidarity with Alabama workers and are proud to support the Valley Labor Report's efforts to inform and build the Southern worker movement. Please visit hometownaction.org and follow our social media channels at Hometown Action to learn more about how you too can get involved to make the South a better place for all workers. Solidarity, y'all.
IBW 558 is like a great football team. You've got to have the aptitude, skills, and knowledge to outperform the competition. If you're a non-union electrician, now is the perfect time to get off the sideline and join our team. We have the absolute best wages and benefit package in North Alabama and Southern Tennessee. It's because our team stands together, bargains together, and our families benefit from it. With immediate openings, you have the opportunity to see why the IBW is the right choice.
Energy Alabama is a locally operated and membership-based nonprofit organization focused on advancing Alabama's clean energy future through education and advocacy. Many people in charge of infrastructure and building decisions simply don't know about how viable clean and renewable energy is. To that end, Energy Alabama has provided instruction to more than thousands of adults and tens of thousands of K-12 students across the state. We're working hard to build careers in clean energy and help everyday Alabamians save money on their utility bills. Learn more about our work and how you can join us at energyalabama.org.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for this program comes from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 136 out of Central Alabama. Learn more at ibew136.org.
Attention union members, membership organizations, podcasters, or anyone with a payment processing need. The future is here, and your organization needs to be prepared by working with Unionly. With Unionly, your union or organization can take payments on a mobile device, eliminating processing fees, giving you a better price than other payment processing methods, while at the same time supporting a union-friendly business with a specialized skill set to meet your needs. Your members will thank you when they pay their dues at their convenience without waiting in line to deposit cash or check. Start preparing for the future today by calling 206-595-8631 or visiting unionly.io.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth. All wealth should go to labor, and you are listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. We've got a phone number and the line is open. That is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. If you want to call in, talk to us about what's been, you got any bad boss stories, you want to talk about your union, have any questions, or if you want to defend Tommy Tuberville scolding Alabamians, feel free to call in. That phone number is open. And Strom in the chat said, work is the only legitimate way to make a living. Indeed, that is our philosophy here. Konstantin Garfieldovsky says that the Financial Times is good, as well as Strom saying the Wall Street Journal and The Economist he reads every day because they're internal memos of the bourgeoisie. And I mean, I think that's, there's definitely, you got to know how to read it, like Strom says, but those are some good places to get good, accurate reporting, as long as you put the right lenses on.
Right, particularly. I mean, the Financial Times and The Economist in particular, I definitely pay attention to because that's true. This is the elites speaking to the elites, not the swill they give to the rest of us. And I find it to be quite illuminating what they talk about. And in fact, they talk about labor relations a lot more than mainstream media does.
Yeah. In the Facebook chat, Joe and Mel say, good morning, y'all. Appreciate it. Edgra says, thousands of teachers voted for Tuberville. Indeed. Hopefully, I do hope that some of these people are able. I hope that enough folks see our response. I'd love for people that he's talking down to realize like how much contempt he has for them and for us and for Alabamians, right? Because he obviously has contempt for people like us. I don't know. Want to do what I can to make people realize that. Medicaid expansion is that's a perennial topic of conversation in Alabama politics. It heats up, especially, it heats up at the beginning of every legislative session, but especially at the beginning of a quadrennium, which is when legislators feel the least heat from their constituents and, importantly, from lobby groups. It's why we're going to see a big school privatization push this session, because parents and teachers have the least recourse right now. But it is also why we will hopefully see a big push for Medicaid expansion this session, because the big lobby groups and the conservative AstroTurf organizations that oppose giving health care to Alabamians are going to have less leverage over those incumbents that might vote normally, if they just voted their conscience, they would vote to give their constituents health care, perhaps. But during an election cycle, those big lobby groups and conservative, just really anti-human organizations, right? I mean, if you're talking about not expanding Medicaid, that is just really an anti-human position, right? Because it results in the deaths of people. It results in the deaths of people, the economic devastation of communities, because it allows rural hospitals to close, and it cuts jobs. I mean, it's just really an anti-Alabamian position to be anti-Medicaid expansion. But so some of the ghouls in Montgomery, they're trying to preempt any conversation about expanding healthcare access in Alabama. And State Senator Chris Elliott, he is the one at the forefront. He is one of the folks at the forefront of this anti-Alabamian campaign last week on the Jeff Poor Show. He said explicitly that he opposes Medicaid expansion because he reckons that if people don't have literal death hanging over our heads, we won't work. He says, quote, I'm adamantly opposed to expanding Medicaid. When we make it easier for people not to go to work, guess what they do? They don't go to work. And I mean, just think about that for just 2 seconds. Just one Mississippi, two Mississippi. Think about that. Who the hell is he talking about? I mean, this is even less believable than the people who reckon there are hordes of folks out there that are subsisting on food stamps just because. That are just happy to sit at home and collect food stamps, as if you can do that, as if you can just sit at home and collect food stamps and not work. It's even less believable than that, because who are the people out there that are refusing to work simply because they have access to health care?
It just doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense at all.
It's also wrong because that's not who Medicaid expansion is even targeting. Medicaid expansion targets low-income workers, right? It's people who are already working, but either cannot afford the private health insurance that is offered at their job, or their job doesn't provide any insurance, or they're working 2 or 3 part-time jobs and don't qualify for benefits. These are working people. These are people who are going to work. They are making money, but it's not enough money to qualify for subsidized Obamacare under the ACA, but it's too much money to get Medicaid as it currently exists in the state of Alabama. It's the coverage gap. And it's well over 200,000 people in that situation. Well over 100,000 Alabamians are offered private insurance but can't afford it.
Yeah.
Over 300,000 people would benefit from Medicaid expansion directly. Not the knock-on effects, not the family side effects of having...
the family side effects of your loved ones not dying.
Right. Turns out it's great to get treatment when you're ill.
God,
when you have injuries,
man.
It is great to get assistance.
Wow.
So, yeah, he's wrong. I mean, he's morally wrong, first of all. But, aside from that, his comments aren't even related to Medicaid expansion that's on the table. It has nothing to do with that.
Yeah. It's just, I mean, it is really just astounding.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I guess why let facts get in the way of tropes?
Right.
Because that's what he wants to traffic in is tropes.
Right.
And he doesn't want to pay attention to the facts around Medicaid expansion, which would make it easier for people to go to work and easier to stay working. Because, again, turns out when you're not dying, that's easier to go to work.
Yeah, it's easy.
When you break bones, it's better to get treatment. When you have illnesses, it's better to get treatment, and it's easier to go to work when you actually have health care.
Yeah. And I mean, Strom in the chat says, do they not go to work in England where they have a national health service? Of course they go to work. Do they not go to work in Canada? Of course they go to work. Do able-bodied veterans not go to work even though they have VA health care? Of course able-bodied veterans go to work.
Right. Oh, and by the way, there are 13,000 veterans in the state of Alabama who, for various reasons, don't qualify for VA and can't afford private health insurance. They would get Medicaid under Medicaid expansion. So I guess Mr. State Senator Chris Elliott doesn't give a damn about those veterans.
Of course. Of course he doesn't.
He's not interested in chiding the companies who aren't providing health insurance, which creates some of the demand for Medicaid expansion. He's not talking about them.
Right.
And this is a guy who is of a party that is all about economic development. Jobs, jobs, jobs. You remember that? Mm-hmm. There was literally a sign for Republicans that said jobs, jobs, jobs. I think that was...
There was one that said jobs, not mobs, too, was another one. And yeah, I mean, you mentioned this in the notes, that it would be one of the most significant investments in rural Alabama's economic development in decades.
Right.
On par, you say, with the community college system and the Tennessee Valley Authority.
Yeah, I mean, I really do think if you look at the scale of the impact,
right,
and the ripple effects from that kind of investment, it would be on par with those two projects.
I mean, it would
change rural Alabama.
Yeah, create thousands of jobs in rural Alabama, allow rural hospitals to stay open, keep communities afloat, because really a lot of these communities in rural Alabama are anchored by the jobs that the hospitals provide.
Right. They have,
in the same way that that they're anchored by the schools, or that in the past they were anchored by, a Ford plant or a GM plant or something like that, right? Or the paper mill in Cortland. Places like that are now anchored by schools and hospitals. And so in addition to, like you said, the knock-on effects of, just the direct impacts of you not dying, and then the knock-on effects of your loved ones not having a loved one die, there's the economic impacts, which are massive. The jobs, the investment.
So much so that there's a lot of research to indicate that it would probably pay for itself. Now, the money, especially the upfront cost of expanding Medicaid is I know a big sticking point, but it's a very minor sum of money compared to the budget. There are many ways they could raise that money. They have been given many ways by many interest groups, by many citizens, many ideas on how they could raise the money. And that's assuming they end up having to really pay much out of pocket at all. And I think that's an assumption, because the economic development that would result, the additional tax revenues that would come from this, it makes it just one of the most sure bet economic development programs that Alabama politicians will ever get to pick from.
Right.
They don't treat it that way, but it is.
Exactly. That's so the takeaway here is that either this guy is lying or he just has contempt for you, right? Because that's his main argument. It's contempt for Alabamians. It's not even that he doesn't even make the case, really, that it would cost too much. It wouldn't, of course, and like we said, it would create jobs and it would be good for the economy in the area. But it's just that he has contempt for you, and he reckons that you should have just literal, actual death hanging over your head before you contribute to society. And I pulled this clip from I was just going to do this segment, but then I actually listened to the segment where he was interviewed on the Jeff Poor Show, and I was like, I have to talk about this. I have to play this because I want you to actually hear his words, because he doesn't only want literal, actual death over your head. He wants it over your children's head, too. Let's listen to some of this from his appearance on the Jeff Poor Show.
It's reasonable to say you see a lot of the larger business folks and the hospitals in particular starting to put on the show about Medicaid expansion. The Public Research Council of Alabama is starting to make its rounds about the benefits of Medicaid expansion and how important that is. I'm adamantly opposed to expanding Medicaid. I think it's going to be very expensive and put a huge burden on our budgets. But I think the underlying issue that nobody likes to talk about is it changes society. When we have more people on the dole that don't have to go to work in order to get health insurance, we end up wondering, why is our labor participation rate so low? And the answer is because in Alabama, half of all the children born in this state are born into Medicaid or CHIPS on the government dole. Half. And when we...
All right, I got to stop it there just to point out half of Alabama's births are on Medicaid, okay? So he is resentful for that.
Yeah.
Rather than asking the question, why is it half of the people in the state I've been elected to represent, why is it half of the births are qualifying for Medicaid? Because he knows damn well Alabama is by no means New York or California. Right. Alabama is by no means the most, flexible or broad or liberal Medicaid program, even for pregnant mothers, even for teenage pregnant mothers. So why is it that mothers in our state are so poor that they qualify for Medicaid? That's not the question he's asking.
Right.
I'll continue.
Make it easier for people to not go to work. Guess what they do? They don't go to work. And that's my concern, is that our policies change society and the way families function overall.
Well, I tell you what, I hear that. I don't know anybody, at least on the Republican side of the aisle. Obviously, there's Democrats that are in favor of it, but no one's out in front of this one. And this is a big one. Maybe it does come up, but who is going in their right mind on the Republican side of the aisle is going to lead that charge?
Who
I
in
don't
there,
know.
just stop that for just a
I
second.
like that messaging, and I hope we can.
Who in their right mind on the Republican side of the aisle would dare vote to ensure that their constituents have health care?
Right?
Like, that's so removed from what Republicans want to do. Like, Jeff Poore has a problem even contemplating that. Like, what, there are Republicans that like care about poor people? No, I don't think so, Chris. I don't think so. That would be ridiculous. They couldn't be Republicans if they cared about poor people.
Yeah, and the other thing I got to say there, I have to go back for a second. I mean, about the half of births being covered by Medicaid. So, would you propose they not be covered by Medicaid? I mean, is that really the logical conclusion here from Senator Chris Elliott? Is that we shouldn't cover them at all?
Right.
So, I mean, what does that mean?
Yeah,
I mean,
well,
do you look back fondly on
Mm-hmm.
the Gilded Age? Do you look back fondly on an era before Medicaid and before any social services at all? I mean, maybe there'll be a rise in innovation from the churches and the poorhouses and the soup kitchens and the charities who are going to take the place.
Well, I think he's about to answer your question about does he wish that these children weren't covered.
That's right. He sure will.
Keep that up. I just know that that I am starting to hear it more, and you and I've talked about this before. You know, you start hearing these little conversations over here from Republican business leaders, and I just it's free money, and we can't. There's nothing is free money, and again, there's a huge cost to society when you don't have to get out there and work to make sure your kids have health insurance. You don't have to get out there and work to make sure your children are you have coverage for your children to be born. It's a scary place to go. I think it undermines the fabric of our society. I've heard of employees that say, "Oh, I'm not getting married to my to somebody I'd otherwise get married to because I can stay on this free state health insurance if I don't do that." That's a state policy that is bad for Alabama and bad for.
It's a scary place to go to ensure that regardless of income, mothers in Alabama can give birth. It's a scary place to go to ensure that regardless of their parents' income, the children will get the care they need. It undermines the fabric of society to ensure that children, babies, have health care regardless of their parents' income. I mean, like, how do you...
it's quite revealing.
It's really difficult to even... It's really genuinely difficult to even formulate an argument against somebody like that because, like, we just have such fundamentally different moral compasses. Like, I just reckon that... I reckon that even if your parent is one of these hypothetical, imaginary, no-good layabouts, that you should still have health care. If you're a child, even if your parent is a no-good layabout, you should have health care. And I don't know how to argue that point to people like this. Like, I don't know how I convince somebody that doesn't think that should be the case. I mean, it's just, we just have totally, just vastly, and I think that my opinion is in line with even the majority, the super majority of Alabamians who are, the voting Alabama. I mean, of course, most registered Alabamians don't vote, and then most of them don't vote for Republicans. I think it's only something like 26% of the eligible voting population votes for Republicans. So, but I think even among that group, I am with the majority of people that say that regardless of parental income, your children should have health care. Like, I just don't think that's a radical position, but somebody like him who is so far on the other side of this issue, who says that actually your children's health should be used as a cudgel against you to make you go to work. I mean, I just can't imagine, I can't get my head around this guy's morality.
Well, I think he said a lot by bringing in fabric of society, because what he's saying is that for him, the fabric of society is quilted through punishment, through leverage, through precarity, that the well-being not just of yourself but your actual children is dependent on you going out, participating in the marketplace, hoping it goes well enough for you. Because the alternative that this guy proposes is punishment.
Yeah.
Punishment for children, punishment for babies, punishment for the elderly, for spouses. It's a level of cruelty that is just, it's hard for us to imagine because we have basic empathy, man.
Yeah. I mean,
we don't want children to go sick.
Even if their parents are layabouts. Like
I don't care what a parent is.
I think that the number of people who would actually fall into that, or just like genuinely like immoral, lazy layabouts, I think that the number of people that exist like that are vanishingly small, but I think even if they have children, their children should have health care.
Right.
Like,
I don't care if that person is the worst person
is a murderer.
on earth. Yes.
A literal murderer.
If there's a child, the child deserves health care. Just like they deserve a safe, healthy life and a good education and a safe home. It's really, and the thing that will piss me off more than anything, and I have intentionally not looked it up because of this, but I would bet you money that State Senator Chris Elliott describes himself as pro-life. I bet he's real pro-life. He's so pro-life that he thinks it's okay to punish children. Deny children health care because of what their parents may or may not do.
Yeah. It's bizarre. I can't understand.
It makes me sick. It
really
makes me
does.
sick to think that a person with this mentality has any position of authority over other human beings.
Yeah.
What kind of mentality does this guy have when he sits down every year for the budget and when he reviews legislation?
Yeah.
Think he gives a damn about any of us?
No. Let's go ahead and take a break. I see that we've got a caller on the line, so if you want to stay on through the break, we'll take your call really quick. Have to be quick, because we have a railroader coming on to talk to us about the latest on the negotiations. So we will take your call on the other side of this break. Stay tuned, folks. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report.
Energy Alabama supports consumers and is a leader in advocating for them. We have been able to successfully fight off utility rate increases in the state, reduce fees for electric vehicles, increase electric vehicle infrastructure spending, and secured a $100 million refund by Alabama Power after the utility overcharged customers for fuel. To learn more about our work advocating for customers and join the fight, go to energyalabama.org.
There's a lot of talk about a shortage of workers, but that's not the case with IBW 558. We have provided our customers over 3,000 workers and performed over 3 million man-hours in a pandemic year. With 8,000 OJT hours, 900 classroom hours, OSHA 30, and a state license, our members receive the equivalent of a master's degree. That's what makes IBW 558 the right choice for your electrical needs. Look us up at Facebook or at IBW558.org.
North Alabama DSA is looking for folks to work for a better North Alabama. They prioritize mutual aid, municipal activism, and union solidarity. Contact them on social media or dsanorthalabama@gmail for more information.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at iamaw44.org.
Hometown Action is a grassroots organization building a multiracial, working-class movement for racial, gender, economic, and environmental justice in Alabama's rural communities. We stand in solidarity with Alabama workers and are proud to support the Valley Labor Report's efforts to inform and build the Southern worker movement. Please visit hometownaction.org and follow our social media channels at Hometown Action to learn more about how you too can get involved to make the South a better place for all workers. Solidarity, y'all.
Support for this program also comes from the Iron Workers, Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need iron workers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Iron Workers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Iron Workers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Alabama's only union talk radio show. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller. We're broadcasting live online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio Studio in Huntsville, Alabama. We got some folks hanging out with us in the chat. We appreciate y'all. Christine Parks says, I wonder how that Chris Elliott guy feels about public education. Probably not the same way that we do. Free American 2020 says, first time I have watched. I normally listen on WVNN. Good to put faces with voices. We appreciate you tuning in, and especially we appreciate you tuning in from WVNN, where we know that a lot of people have, maybe differing opinions than us. We think it's. I listen to lots of conservative talk radio. Probably,
more than is healthy.
More than
is
healthy. Yeah. So I think it's good. I think it's good to get different perspectives.
But it's like we were talking about yesterday. I hate listening to NPR, so that you don't have to.
That's right. Yeah. So like I said, we got a caller on the line. 843 area code. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
This is Strom McCallum, and I'm calling from South Carolina.
Strom from South Carolina. How do? Thanks for calling in. Appreciate it.
I'm doing
appreciate
okay.
Appreciate your contribution in the chat as always. What's on your mind?
Thank you. I'm going to keep this to 15 to 20 seconds because I know y'all have a guest. I think that we should not hesitate to call these opponents of Medicaid expansion and these people who are mad at people for being hesitant to take jobs which pay non-subsistence wages, anti-human and victim blamers. That's what I think.
Yeah.
I think the anti-Medicaid expansion is very much like an anti-human position. I don't see how you can justify it. Especially in the way that he presented it, right? I mean, it was explicitly like an anti-child position, like I want to hang your child's health over you, right? I mean, it's unconscionable.
And the governor of my state has similar lines about both Medicaid expansion and people being hesitant to take these bad wage jobs. So,
yeah,
solidarity.
Thanks, Strom.
Thanks for the call, Strom. I appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Anti-human. That's what these people are.
Yeah. All right, folks. So unions representing more than half of railroad labor have now voted down the agreement that was negotiated between the unions, bargaining committees, and the rail companies with the help, in quotation marks, of the President of the United States and the Secretary of Labor. And let's remember, this is the deal that Biden really tried to sell us on. The media really helped him with that, especially the right-wing media, who said that these railroad workers got the whole store, is what Ben Shapiro said, if you'll remember.
Golly.
And yet, despite Biden trying to convince us and the railroad workers that the deal was good, a majority of them have now voted it down. And so here to answer the question, why, is Paul Lindsay. Paul Lindsay is a locomotive engineer. He serves on the steering committee of the Railroad Workers United. He is a Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen member. That is a Teamsters affiliate. And Ron said he is party to the National Freight Agreement. And so, Paul, appreciate you coming on the show. Does that mean that you're on the negotiating committee for the BLET?
No, that's not what that means. I'm not sure how that verbiage got in there exactly, but I definitely have been working hard to try to get the details of the agreement out to my fellow colleagues and everything. And I take part in what's been going on with the Surface Transportation Board hearings and writing a lot of letters related to the railroad industry about it. But no, I don't work with negotiations.
Gotcha. Okay. I appreciate that, Paul. And I appreciate, and I'll just lay this out for folks. We had Ron scheduled to be on. He is an organizer for the Railroad Workers United, which is an inter-union, cross-craft solidarity caucus of railroad labor. We had him scheduled, but he is not able to attend because he got called into work, right? He had to go get on the trains.
That's correct. He works as an engineer out of Reno. I actually literally just got off work less than an hour ago. I brought a train over all last night. So,
and that's and I think I hope and you'll answer this in more detail as we continue. But I hope that kind of illustrates the not only the hardworkingness of railroad workers, right? Despite lectures from politicians and media folks. To y'all and the broader public saying that you're lazy and you're getting too much money, but also the instability of it. We had he didn't know if he was going to be at work today, and so we booked him, figuring that he was going to be able, and then he just got called into work with less than 24 hours notice because he just told me like 7 hours ago that he wasn't going to be able to make it, and he's going to have you come instead. And so, that's the kind of stuff that y'all have to put up with all the time, right? I mean, what does the on-call schedule look like for folks like you and Ron?
Well, schedule, that word needs to just be deleted. There is no schedule. But it's 24 hours on call. I've worked the last 7 days in a row. Yeah, you mentioned having 24 hours notice. It's a lot less than that. I mean, we get an hour and a half call time. Basically, our phone rings and we need to be ready to go to work for a couple days at a time. And it might be 2 o'clock in the morning. It might be 6 a.m. It may be noon. You kind of try to look at where the trains are in the lineup on the website, but you never know exactly what you're getting called for. But
right.
It's part of what we do, and it's what we've always done, and we've never had a retention problem like we do now. This all comes down to the deterioration of the work conditions because of the attendance policies and a lot of the other policies instituted by the rail industry in the last few years.
Well, let's talk some about. Yeah, well, let's talk some about those policies. I want to get to the latest and all of that, but. And we did have Hugh Sawyer on. He's a railroad worker from Georgia about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago. And he went over some of this. But I just want to remind folks because this issue gets vanishingly little coverage, it seems like, for as important as y'all are to the nation's economy. And then when it gets covered, you just really don't hear about the effects of that folks like you have to go through and what you've been putting up with. So talk to us some about why railroad workers are unhappy in the first place. Like, what are those policies over the last, few years, last decade or so, that have really created a problem for employee retention?
So in general, over the last few years, especially, we've seen a deterioration of our industry. Now, you look at the railroad, you look at a lot of people that work there, a lot of them are generational, and they have parents, grandparents. They've been in the industry for a long time. And over the last few years, especially, though, we've seen this disappearance of this company that we used to, at least, even though we have our disagreements with it, at least admire the industry in the favor of share buybacks and the pursuit of precision scheduled railroading, of lowering the operating ratio, of cutting everything. I mean, whether you're talking the maintenance staff, the maintenance facilities, crews, furloughing crews, even little petty things that sound ridiculous, but like I don't remember when the last time was that we had a summer employee picnic during the summertime. Our company is the largest, oldest employer in Pocatello, and yet we didn't have any representation at either of the two parades this summer. They don't care anymore. They are pursuing the almighty operating ratio, and they are pursuing gains for Wall Street now. They don't run a railroad. They run a corporation. They run a stock symbol that just so happens to run trains. And that fundamentally comes down to what has changed with the industry. And where that has led us to is they have furloughed several years ago. They furloughed lots and lots of conductors that they hired. And this was before COVID. They're trying to blame COVID for manpower shortages. They furloughed these employees that were loyal and some had moved there to work. And this happened all around the country. And then when it came time to pull these guys back 2 or 3 years later, none of them wanted to come back, and for good reason. The railroad doesn't want to show any sort of stability. So we had a single-digit retention rate on the employees coming back to work because the railroad showed what they really think of their employees. And so they just ran us ragged. And around the country, it's still happening all over the place, where these assignments that used to kind of be predictable. So even though you're on call 24/7, if you're on a regular run, you usually kind of have a general idea of, well, I'm going to be off for about a day and a half, and then I'll get called back to work. But when they're out of people, they're calling you to step up, calling you on the phone 7, 8, 9 times a night while you're trying to sleep, to take assignments that aren't yours. And guys have been doing that, especially in some terminals around the railroad, for months and months and months, working every day. And that is where a lot of the just worn out, disgruntled mentality has come from, and that is where the retention among long-term employees, retention rate going down, is coming from, because the quality of life has gone away. Another thing is that we are 3 years without a contract. Now they say, oh, well, engineers just ratified. It was only like a 52 to 48% ratification. Definitely not overwhelming. And I don't know anyone personally who voted for that contract for several reasons that I go into. But I got to cover the attendance policy as well. So the railroads over the last few years have imposed these attendance policies, basically implying that really your life belongs to them. You don't own your life. And a lot of us are starting to, especially with 3 years out of contract and watching the railroads embargo our customers and drive freight away and slow our operations down, and essentially in pursuit of more money for Wall Street. In doing this, we just, it's just a cumulative pile that has led to a low retention rate and a disgruntled view where we don't want to vote for that. Didn't want to vote for that contract.
Well, let's make the sick leave attendance policy explicit if you haven't already, and I missed it. It's how many sick days do y'all get?
We don't get any paid sick days per year. We never have. We get vacation time, which it's not like it's not like European countries where you get vacation automatically. I've worked 17 years to get my 4th week of vacation finally next year. And that's working 12 hours, some days, 7 days, or some weeks, 7 days in a row. It's just exhausting. As I said, I've been on a train all night. It can be exhausting.
Just driving, down to Birmingham, like an hour and a half, 2 hour drive is not fun. You feel a little bit wiped after that. I couldn't imagine having to be on a train, this huge machine for 12, 14 hours. It's just ridiculous, unsafe, obviously, and very tiring. And so where we're at now is that unions representing more than half of railroad labor have voted down the tentative agreements that were negotiated with the quote unquote help of President Biden and Secretary of Labor Marty Walsh. What was in those agreements that were supposed to? I mean, we were told that these were great. These were great, and they're going to really provide for railroad workers. They're going to make the industry better. Biden was really, really trying to sell y'all and sell us on this. How disconnected was what he was saying from reality?
Okay, so going back to, you mentioned that Ben Shapiro quote about our agreement about giving us everything, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I'll start with mentioning that the percentage, they like to tout the percentage increase that they were giving us, and touting that that's the largest single percentage increase in decades for railroaders. Well, we also are seeing the highest inflation in decades.
Right.
But that percentage does not include the only portion of our income that is non-taxable. So that is an issue that I've been pushing heavily, is that we lost our ability to itemize our meals a few years ago when those tax cuts came, or tax changes, or whatever you want to call them, during the Trump administration. It wasn't a tax cut for us. We lost $6,000 or $7,000 in yearly deductions.
Wow.
We can't write off our meals when we're away from town 250 days a year.
Wait, hold on. Wait a second, Paul. Wait a second. So you're telling me that the tax cuts for working class Americans that was touted by Donald Trump in 2017 actually raised your taxes?
Yes, transportation workers, it took away a vital deduction that we've always used.
Wow.
We were able to take a standard amount for every day that we were gone and write it off at the end of the year. And that was a huge improvement. We lost that. It's costing us, I estimate, about $6,000 or $7,000 a year, depending on how actively you're working on the road versus in the yard when we're gone. So we get a non-taxable meal allowance, right? That hasn't gone up, at least in my area. It hasn't gone up since 1993. So I can be gone away from home for 2 days at a time, and I only make $12 on my non-tax. And that did not go up in this contract. So they can tout the highest percentage pay increase in decades, but there are certain portions of our pay that still are untouched, like the only portion that the IRS can't touch, that the state can't touch, that's actually our product of our labor to keep dollar for dollar. So that's an issue that I push heavily on. What was you mentioned about the contract, other provisions in it that we did not like?
Yeah, well, what were the, because Biden was really touting it, and of course, you mentioned that I mentioned that Ben Shapiro was really going out of his way to make it seem like y'all quote unquote got the store, right? But even Biden was going out there and saying that it was this is a great deal, and it's really going to help y'all, and so what were some of the other things that seemed to y'all disconnected from reality that Biden was saying specifically?
So one of the things we were going for was the ability to take time off of work when we're sick, when our family is sick, just the ability to take time off. That is something that's changed in the last few years, particularly, is the crackdown on attendance, the ability to take time off when you need it. And the attendance policies were preventing people from doing that. So that became a big issue, and the unions were fighting for paid sick time, which it's kind of funny. There's actually an executive order somewhere saying that federal contractors are required to provide paid sick time to their employees. Right. And the railroads claim that they're not subject to that, but yet with everything else, they claim to be subject to it. So again, the railroads just get away with whatever their interpretation of the law is. We're asking for paid sick days. So this agreement, this record amazing agreement, basically gave us 3 extra paid days, or not unpaid days off per year, not paid. 3 days off per year. That you've got to plan at least 30 days off in advance.
30 days in advance. Oh wow, I'm gonna get COVID 30 days from now.
Exactly. I'm gonna plan for that. Yep. And you can only take it on Tuesday, Wednesday, or a Thursday. By the way, too. You can't take it on any sort of weekend or anything. So that is the
hopefully Paul. Now this contract also comes with. I mean, COVID is coming to the table as well and saying that they're not going to get you sick during the days that you can't take off, and they'll give you 30, and that COVID is going to give you 30 days advance notice, right?
Yeah, the flu is going to.
Yeah, they'll definitely give you 30 days notice. Yeah. So that is the record, amazing, great compromise. Was 3 extra days unpaid. And also the railroads promised that they won't discipline us if we're ever in the hospital. You know, how generous of them.
But also unpaid while you're in the hospital, right?
Yes, exactly. Wow. So what we lost was essentially our entire system of scheduling. So while we don't have schedules, we do have a system that makes it to where our runs are somewhat predictable, that we know if you're so you can be on the extra board and work every day and cover all kinds of assignments, different directions. And when you get sick of that, you can go to a regular run, just going a single direction. You kind of have some sort of flexibility in your life. Well, the railroad's been pushing for this idea of self-protecting pools for years, basically making it to where, so if you're on a regular run, and there's 10 trains on the lineup and you are the sixth one on the lineup, then whenever the 6th train goes out, you're going to be the one on it. And you kind of watch where they are location wise. If let's say someone takes a sick day ahead of you, the first and second people take a sick day ahead of you, it doesn't affect you because someone off the extra board covers your spot. So you stay the same relative to them. So if you go to bed at 8 o'clock at night, expecting to go to work at 6 o'clock in the morning, you shouldn't, in theory, get a surprise call at 11 p.m. right as your eyes are closing that you need to go to work. But the railroads want self-protected pools. They want to cut staff even more and get rid of our extra boards so that the pools cover themselves. So if those 2 guys lay off sick ahead of you, well, I guess you're going to work right as you were going to sleep. So they want that. And they've been wanting it for years. Well, they used this contract as an opportunity to slide that in there. Wow. And they basically gave the railroad a blank check that, well, we're going to open the door for self-protecting pools now. And that will significantly reduce any quality of life we have, especially if you're on a longer run, like where I'm at. It's going to significantly reduce quality of life. So we got 3 unpaid.
Paul, I hate to cut you off, but we're coming up on our radio exit. We're going to continue the show with Paul Lindsay on the other side of this break, talking to him about what is next. And what's next is that the unions have a strike date set for December the 9th. And so something has to happen before December the 9th, or else we're going to see a huge rail labor strike. And we'll talk about what those courses of actions can be on the other side, online. Come find us on YouTube, on Facebook. We're going to be continuing this conversation with Paul Lindsay about that and about public ownership of the rails. All right, let's close the WVNN tab. So Paul, we're off the radio now, and we are, I want to continue this conversation about the rails, and one of the things that y'all are pushing is public ownership of the rails, and I want to dig into that conversation some more. So we're going to take a break, and have you got another 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes to talk to us about that?
Oh yeah, sorry, I tend to be kind of long-winded sometimes.
No, this has been great. I appreciate it, and it's I think that the folks that are listening on the radio, I think that they were really able to get a sense of what y'all are having to go through. So we're gonna take a really quick break, get some water and stuff, and then we're gonna continue this conversation with Paul Lindsay, railroad worker and a member of the steering committee of Railroad Workers United.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell. Go to Harlan County, there is no neutral there. You'll either be a union man or a thug party age player. Which side are you on? 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 Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell. Which side are you on? 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 Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell. Go to Harlan County, there is no neutral there. You'll either be a union man or a thug party age player. Which side are you on? 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 Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell. Which side are you on? 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 Which side are you on?
Still listening to the Valley Labor Report, Alabama's only Union Talk Radio Show. We are now in overtime, the second half of our program that is online only. We are still talking to Paul Lindsay. Coming up later in overtime, we're going to be talking to Hayden Wright, a Alabama English teacher, president of the Miners Auxiliary down in Brookwood, about a lesson that she gave some of her students about Cesar Chavez's address to the Commonwealth Club of California. And the conversation that ensued after that. So looking forward to that conversation. I also just wanted to share this tweet that came across my timeline during the break that is just really puts a lot of confidence in, in the billionaire class, right? Before I was anti-billionaire, and now I think, I'm starting to warm up to them because they're really proving themselves. Here it is. Earlier today, Tesla announced that some of its cars will be running the beta version of its self-driving system. Happening now, a multi-car pileup on the Bay Bridge in San Francisco involving 18 injuries reportedly caused by a Tesla, quote, suddenly driving erratically. Officials say 16 people were involved in the crash, 8 adults and 8 children.
Wow.
Love it. So I mean,
way to go, Elon.
Incredibly competent billionaire class that we've got. No reason to worry about our society. So let's continue this conversation with Paul Lindsay. Paul, you were talking about Paul Lindsay is a railroad worker, a member of the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen, a Teamsters affiliate, and on the steering committee of Railroad Workers United, an inter-union cross-craft solidarity caucus of railroad labor. Paul, you were talking about the contract that was negotiated with, I say, quote, the help of President Biden and Secretary of Labor Marty Walsh that gave you, and so the things that you had laid out was that it gave you 3 unpaid days off if you were sick that had to be scheduled 30 days in advance, could only happen on certain days of the week, and that they wouldn't discipline you if you were literally in the hospital. And they were able to, and I didn't realize this until you just told me, because my impression of the deal was that it was like only marginally better, and that was the issue with it. But you laid out this part of the contract that is actually a step backwards that would allow the rail companies to call you in even more short notice than they do already. And so, there's just all sorts of problems with this contract. This negotiated agreement? Was there anything else that you felt was important to share about the contract, about why your sisters and brothers in the union and in other unions voted it down?
Well, so the 2 provisions on self-protecting pools and automatic markup rules, it laid out basically a foundation allowing for this, but it didn't give us any real details. It says that, we're going to allow for this, and after you sign the contract, well, we'll go ahead and negotiate and bargain about it then. So we still don't actually know what it is. It's just kind of a blank check. The railroads have shown many times in the past that you give them an inch, they take a mile. There's not really any integrity in this outfit. So as far as the railroads are trying to play this, like, well, you're going to have a couple of scheduled off days. And even our union is pushing this idea that, we're going to have a couple predictable days off. Well, we already have scheduled days off every year. It's called taking vacation. And the railroads will yank our vacation when they feel like it. We've had in the past where they say I'm going on vacation for a full week and have a plane ticket scheduled for, and a vacation starting at midnight on Friday, right? And then the railroad calls you to work at 23:59 on Thursday night to go to work on a 2-day trip. So I guess you're going to have to lay off sick and take the attendance points if you plan on catching your flight. So they already won't live up to our existing contractual days off. Why are we to think that they're going to live up to a few new promise days? So that's another reason for it. Basically, there's just a general lack of trust in our industry because they don't deserve the trust.
Right. So then so now that, I think everybody has voted now, a majority, unions representing the majority of labor have voted it down, and the strike dates are all set for December the 9th. So sketch out the possible paths forward for us.
Okay, so with that strike date being there, everyone wants to focus on the strike date, but unfortunately, Congress has made it very clear they're not going to allow employees to take ownership of their lives. They would almost surely force us back to work one way or another. They can force binding arbitration. They could force a contract and just say, this is the law. But, one thing I would have, if there's any congressmen that actually listen to your podcast or your show here, they also could offer us a favorable contract if they so chose. But unfortunately, they never doesn't matter which party, no one truly seems to support labor. They can talk about it. They can talk about it at our conventions. But really, when it comes down to it, it really seems like this whole situation was just kicked the can down the road until after the election, because now they can force us back to work. Right. And regardless of whose name is on that bill, the election already happened. So there'll be no repercussions for it. So one way or another, they will most likely force us back to work. And everyone knows how devastating a work stoppage could be for the industry. And we've been talking about this for months, especially several months ago when we thought it was actually legitimately going to happen. But what about when the companies themselves instigate the work stoppage? So when the strike was about to happen, when we were just a couple days before it, actually for almost a week leading up to it, the railroads themselves started embargoing customers and shutting intermodal ports and tying down trains early, shutting down the economy to try to twist the government's arm into action. And no one wants to talk about that. Everyone wants to talk about, a labor shortage. Not 1 hour of time has been lost on the account of labor. It has all been at the railroads, that these giant BlackRock-owned corporations that buy back their own shares and take COVID bailouts, they were the ones that stopped your rail shipments for the days leading up to the strike.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's such an important thing to underline, is that the threat is, the quote unquote threat, is really as much or more, it is all on capital. It's all on these rail companies for one reason or another, because because they have all the power in their hands to end the strike by giving y'all what you're asking for, which is
reasonable.
Very reasonable, right?
Sickly in the year 2022. Are you freaking kidding me?
Yeah.
Really?
And so they could just nix the thing in the bud right there. But also, so if they don't do that and y'all strike, it's their fault. And then obviously, if they do a lockout, it's super their fault.
And that's essentially what they did when they were looking at us striking. For the several days leading up to it, they were initiating a soft lockout and just saying, well, we're trying to institute a orderly shutdown. But bottom line, these companies are too big to fail. They know that no matter what happens, they can do anything they want. They could run their business right into the ground, and bottom line, Big Daddy government will come in there and bail them out. So that's really what.
Yeah, well, what are Democrats in the government? What are the conversations? What are the conversations right now? Because you mentioned that that they could, there's seems to me there's more or less three kind of short-term paths. And that's either that there's a strike or a lockout, and that's one option. There's an implemented contract on the company's terms, but you could also just as easily have an implemented contract on the workers' terms, and the government could just impose the workers' terms on the companies. But the conversation around that seems totally limited to to lefty podcasts or radio shows like ours. I don't see any conversation about implementing the workers' terms, or even more than, if I was president, right, I would be implementing like double the work, triple the workers' terms as punishment for letting the thing go this long, right? I mean, that's what you really should be doing, because your requests have always been reasonable. And so what, a justice-minded, president and government would be saying, look, obstinate companies, we're going to impose not only what the unions are asking for, but we're going to say you have to give them double what they're asking for. But that is not even in the conversation at all. And even just imposing the workers' terms is really, really kind of a fringe part of the conversation. So why is that?
I would say because essentially both parties are owned by the same people in one form or another. There's subtle differences, but we all know that money is really what directs our politics. And the railroads are unchallenged monopolies, just like many companies in the United States. And then you look at the people behind the railroads. You look at the primary shareholders of the big four monopoly railroads. It's BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, the same people that own basically every other corporation in America, and it's the same money behind it all. And they can buy any politicians they want, and they can direct the agenda. And I think we all know this. This is in every single industry. This isn't just the railroad. We just happen to be the industry that is receiving the most coverage right now. Mm-hmm. But I believe that our fight here to be able to at least have the right to strike is so important to anyone that believes that they should have the right to unionize, because we are legally allowed to just be forced back to work without question. Congress is just acceptable practice. Well, how in the world can you claim to have a free or democratic country in any way if people don't own their labor?
Right.
So you mentioned earlier, these companies are too big to fail, and basically they feel like they can, and it seems to be the case that they can get away with whatever they want, and the government is going to bail them out. And so something that Railroad Workers United has been pushing is for the government to just take over the rails. If we're gonna, if we as a society are going to allow these monopolies to exist, if we're going to be the ones that are going to be footed with the bill whenever there is a need to bail out this industry, we should just own it. It should just be ours. It should be the public's, like it is in other countries. And so talk to us about the benefits to society and to y'all that public ownership would bring. And why is it that y'all are pushing this as a long-term solution to these issues of these companies running the show?
So, that's a topic that unfortunately people hear it and they automatically make assumptions. We're not suggesting that we just need to have a giant freight Amtrak company that controls everything. That's not what we're suggesting at all. What we're suggesting is aligning ourselves more aligned with what the rest of the developed world is doing. And that's that the rails themselves, the infrastructure, is owned and dispatched by some sort of government agency, and private companies can pay to use the track. I mean, that's what we do with the highways, with the interstate highways. They are owned and maintained and everything, and there's open access. So there's competition. We don't have much of a competition problem in the trucking industry. We sure do with the rail industry. So the reason why we've kind of come to this conclusion is watching our industry have zero effective investment in modern technology, in electrification, in things that we need for the future to have a functional, growing, productive rail industry, which is vitally important to the United States economy. Instead, they buy back their own shares. I mean, for the last over a decade, every single year, the railroads have spent far more on share buybacks, and then on top of that, dividends, than they have on any sort of investment or improvement in the railroad. They have no intention on really investing in the growth of the industry. They have been shrinking the industry because they want the most profitable captive shipper traffic they can. They drive all the other traffic off onto the highways. So every time the railroad drives away a customer intentionally and drives them to trucks because well, we want to make more money, and they do. They keep the highest paying shippers. They drive these truckloads onto our government funded highways. So it's almost like an externality. We're paying for their record share buybacks and dividends and record profitability every quarter by government subsidized highways. So the idea is to bring all of the railroads under the same umbrella, and these private railroads, they can operate and pay to use the track, just like trucks pay to use the interstate. There's nothing wrong with that. That is the idea, is public ownership of the rail, so that we can grow our system and electrify it and expand it, and use and compare the budgets of the highway system as well as the rail system when we make our transportation decisions in this country. And I don't think that's a very radical idea at all.
No.
Right.
One final thing I'll add to that as well is before I turned over there, is that in 1917, I believe it was, we actually nationalized the U.S. rail system during World War I, because the railroads back then were fighting and bickering over profits and competition and everything, and they weren't investing in growth, and there was a shortage of locomotives and a shortage of cars, and they couldn't move the freight for the war effort. And we nationalized the railroad for a period of about 3 years. And during that time, the industry grew exponentially and got new locomotives and new equipment and new infrastructure. And then at the end of that, there was a plan to potentially make it a permanent thing, but for various reasons, it didn't happen. And it went back to private ownership. We've done it before. And I would say we do have a war to fight. I mean, if you guys want to reduce carbon, electrification of the railroads is really the way to do it. I mean, not these expensive batteries and going and mining lithium out of the ground and cobalt and everything. You electrify the railroads. That's where you should be starting. But,
absolutely.
Well, Paul, I think that's this is all really great, and you definitely edified me about y'all's stance on public ownership of the rails. I thought that it was more of a having a giant national Amtrak kind of thing for the rails, but and so even though this is a more modest proposal, it makes a lot of sense. I think It makes a lot of sense to just basically bring the rails in line with what we do with the highways, and so I appreciate you laying that out for us. And was there anything else that you thought was that you feel is important to let people know on this on this issue of the rail dispute coming up?
Just let people know that if regardless of how this turns out, regardless of even if there were a strike for a few days, if the Congress forces back to work, regardless of how this ends, if we have a bad contract, there are people lining up in droves, even people with many, many years of service that are leaving the industry. And people are worried about a strike. Well, record attrition numbers are probably going to hurt the industry and hurt the economy far worse than any labor strike would. So that's really what you're focused on, is growing the industry and keeping certified, highly trained people that operate their trains and that know every inch of their territory, and keeping them from leaving.
Right. So I appreciate that, Paul. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. I did want to ask you this, and I had been aware of this before, but I wasn't thinking of it for this interview, and so I know that you're not. You didn't come prepared to talk about this, but Braxton Wright mentioned this in our chat, and he's a coal miner here in Alabama. Is one of them been on strike for over 600 days, and he mentioned that CSX has been hauling scab coal from Warrior Met, and I know that CSX is one of the union rail lines, rail companies, and so has there not been any conversation among the rail unions to stop to honor the picket line in that instance, and to stop transporting this scab coal for Warrior Met here in Alabama?
So as far as that's concerned, the railroads themselves, they're a common carrier. So according to federal law, they can't refuse the coal. They can't refuse products because they are a common carrier. I've never personally heard about this issue. It doesn't surprise me. I'd never heard of it. Trying to keep up on national issues.
Right.
But another thing as well is a lot of these factories, a lot of these refineries actually, or, refineries and mines and everything, a lot of them have their own switching locomotives that they use to build some of these trains. And a lot of times the trains will be, I don't know the configuration of this one, but the train will be set up, prepared and ready to go. And the train crew just climbs on it. But obviously, if there was a picket line in front of the train, I don't know any of my coworkers that would cross the picket line. They're not crossing the picket line. They're just getting.
And
on
y'all
the
have
train.
in your contracts, y'all have in your contracts the ability to honor picket lines, right? Because I mean, it's something that I see all the time is that, if just one of these unions, even one of the smaller ones, go on strike, it would trigger a national rail strike because the others would honor those picket lines. So is that like any picket line?
Yes. So if the carmen were on strike or the conductors voted down the contract, and really ours should have been voted down as engineers as well. It was such a slim margin. But yes, any picket line, we're not going to cross the picket line. And I don't know of any of my coworkers that would willingly cross a picket line setup. It's not going to happen. So yes, they need to solve the labor dispute across the entire industry with all the unions. Because if there's a picket line, none of us are going to work.
Right. Which union represents CSX folks?
It would be the same with the other railroads, depending on what craft.
They'd have different crafts. Okay.
Yes. As far as conductors and engineers, it'd be the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers for engineers, and then the SMART sheet metal and rail transportation workers that represent the conductors. There's a whole bunch of different unions depending on the crafts, but those two are the biggest, followed by the Brotherhood of Maintenance Away Employees, I believe, is the next largest. And,
if you wouldn't mind letting us know if there's been any conversations about that, because I know that's something that some of these miners down here have had an issue with about. As conversations about this rail strike have come up, they have felt really conflicted about like how, about offering their support or being very vocal about offering their support because of the fact that these like quote unquote, union railroad companies are transporting their coal and really, really undercutting their position. So I know that they would really appreciate any support that y'all could give them from the Railroad Workers United or anything that y'all could do inside your unions. So.
I would say just from an observation point, being an engineer, if I were to see a picket line standing in the tracks in front of the locomotive, I'm not getting on. I'll call the railroad and say there's a picket line I'm not crossing. I don't think anyone's tried that, and I'm not suggesting anything, but I'm just saying personally, I wouldn't cross a picket line if there was a picket line that's standing out there in front of the locomotive where I get on. But if there's no picket line, they can't. There's nothing suggesting that there's a picket line. If they're just picketing the coal plant and not people picking up their coal, the equipment being used to use it, then how are we to know there's a picket line? So,
and how are you to know that coal is coming from Warrior Med as opposed to any, the Green Mountain or Peabody mines or whatever? Yeah. So, okay.
So there's opportunities.
We're just getting on a train is all we're doing.
I think there's opportunities for some dialogue then moving forward. And I just, again, want to thank you for coming on the show. I want to thank you.
After working a long night, too.
Yeah,
right?
man. Yeah. Really, that means a lot. The fact that you have a dedication to your brothers and sisters, that you'd be willing to come on a show like ours after working a long shift just to spread the word. So thank you for all you're doing. Thank you for, railroad workers. Y'all are the backbone of the country. You deserve what you're asking for and so much more. And we're going to do anything we can to keep the pressure up and spread the word. And just wishing y'all love and solidarity in the fights ahead.
Awesome. Well, take care and hope to see you again.
All right, Paul. Bye.
All right.
Here in about 20 minutes, we're going to be talking to Hayden Wright about Cesar Chavez, but we got some other stories that we'll go to really quick before she jumps on the line. I think we've got her scheduled to jump on the line about 11:50 or noon.
Well, she is in the Zoom.
She is in the Zoom? Okay,
so
well, we can go ahead and bring her on, and we can get to those stories after, just be more respectful of her time,
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll work on getting her in the Zoom. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah,
as a former teacher, and of course my wife is an English teacher like Hayden, and so definitely interested in that conversation. And I don't know if she's prepared to talk about it at all, but I'd love some of her reactions about the SDC conversations we've had recently. I know she was in the chat when we were interviewing Randy Kelly and had some SDC people call in. So any feedback she has there, of course, would be cool. And I know Kim Kelly just came out with a great new article highlighting that it's been over 600 days now with the UMWA strike in Brookwood. And Kim's article was in Jezebel. She focused primarily on the women involved in the strike. We've done a lot of history. It's a very good piece, and I hope spread the word to new audiences. I don't know what the audience is like for Jezebel, but it's probably not the same as like the Real News Network or something like that. So hopefully got the word out to some new folks, because the work that Hayden and her sisters are doing down there to support the miners it's fantastic. It's fantastic, and it sounds to me like most of the men down there would fully admit, they wouldn't have been able to make it over 600 days without the women there behind them beside them, So.
Yeah, well, so we've got now on the line Hayden Wright. She's an English teacher, president of the Women's Auxiliary down there in Brookwood.
Hayden is not on the line.
Oh, Hayden's not on the line yet?
I think she must be having some connection issues. Yeah, I tried to let her in, but it didn't happen.
She dropped off.
Yeah, so
okay, gotcha.
I will keep my eyes peeled. If Hayden comes back in, we will switch over to her. I'm happy to move on. I know we had a couple other things on the docket we could talk about this afternoon or this morning.
We got a couple other things, and let's do this one because this one will be pretty quick. The Amazon workers in Alabama and across the country and across the world in 30 different countries. 30 different countries took various actions against Amazon to protest their treatment of their employees. Actions from strikes to pickets to protests to demonstrations. And here in Alabama, the striking mine workers actually partnered with the RWDSU's organizing committee in Bessemer to hold a demonstration outside of the Bessemer facility. And we actually got a special address just for us from Big Mike on the scene last night, sent to us from Hayden Wright, who was there with, in her capacity as president of the Women's Auxiliary down there.
I think we had a few other comrades down there as well.
Absolutely. Birmingham DSA was down there. Yeah. And we got a special address just for us from Big Mike. So let's hear what he had to say.
Poster, as you know, everybody calls me Big Mike, all my friends do. We're standing here today in solidarity, making Amazon pay. Excuse me one second. Let me borrow this. We want to make Amazon pay today, and we want them to pay because we want them to pay the workers who's putting all the work in, who's made Jeff Bezos the richest man in the world because of the work that they have done. So we standing in solidarity all around the world, letting Jeff Bezos know that this is just not a BHM1 thing. This is around the world at all of his facilities. Everybody is complaining about the same thing. Like I said before, the only smile that you see is on that building or on the commercials that you see come across your screen. The smile is not on the workers' faces. That's what a smile needs to be, on the workers' faces who's breaking their back, that's doing everything that they can. They need a living wage, not a minimum wage. Amen. They can't even afford their apartments or anything with the wages that they're making. So we're here standing in solidarity to let them know that the union is still here. We haven't went anywhere. and we hear them and someone cares.
Love to see that from Big Mike. One of the, as somebody said on Twitter, and I can't remember who it was, one of Alabama's biggest labor celebrities, and I think that is certainly an accurate statement about Big Mike. So we appreciate him taking the time to record that statement for us, and wishing them all the best, and really happy that they were able to take part in that, and that they were able to get they were able to participate in that action with so many other workers from across the country and across the world. I mean, like I said, in 30 different countries, Amazon workers took part in demonstrations against the company.
Yeah, and on Black Friday,
yep.
perfect time to do so. And yeah, I really appreciate all of our sisters and brothers in the Birmingham area who pulled that event together.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Hayden is on the line.
All right.
Do believe? Yeah.
So we have on the line now Hayden Wright. She is president of the Women's Auxiliary down in Brookwood for the miners, UMWA. She's an English teacher, and we brought her on to talk about a lesson that she gave about Cesar Chavez to her children in that discussion, but Adam mentioned that he wanted to get her thoughts, if she had any, about our conversations that we've been having over the last couple of weeks about the state of the Democratic Party. And so with that, Hayden, thanks for jumping on and taking the time to talk to us this morning. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me on today. I always love coming and spending some time with you guys. State of the Democratic Party, that's a good question. I am House District Rep for District 49, and I also sit on the executive board for Congressional District 6. I'm the vice chair of the Youth Caucus, which I will say our caucus is amazing. They're doing great things, good works. Several of them were actually out with us last night in Bessemer supporting those workers.
Great.
I wish the main party was interested in actually being out in the field supporting workers. That hasn't really been what I've seen. Some of the candidates were fantastic. They had no really support from the state party. You're talking about Dr. Will Boyd, who's incredible. Lisa Ward, who ran a good campaign. But those were independent campaigns. They were volunteers. They were with themselves. It wasn't with the state party. So I really hate that the party put out statements looking like they should be thanking them for something. I don't really see that having been the case. So right now it's questionable. I do know for a fact last week when it was said that email lists haven't been given, that was inaccurate. They had those prior to the meeting that actually didn't make quorum because it was scheduled at the same time as the Labor Notes Conference, because myself and the chair and then the vice chair of Labor Youth Affairs, which is on the executive board, we spent about 2 weeks getting with all of our members, getting their contact information, compiling it into a document, and making sure that we provided that to the party. So we had gathered all that information over the course of working for several weeks to make sure that they had that prior to that meeting. So I do know that wasn't necessarily accurate when that was stated on the air last week.
That's a shame. I hate to hear that. And so have you... since then, I think it's actually been 2 weeks, maybe even, since we talked to Randy Kelly. And in the intervening 2 weeks, have you seen, I know, obviously, 2 weeks it's enough time to send an email, at least, I think, but it's not, it's not enough to turn the party around. But have you seen anything in the last 2 weeks from the party about moving forward from the elections?
I have not seen anything from the actual party chair. Tabitha has still sent out some communications. We were sent out an email from Joe Reed, which is the other caucus, the minority caucus. He is the vice chair of that caucus. He sent out an email condemning the violence and shooting and showing some support for the LGBTQ community as they're going through that time.
Okay, well that's great to hear that there was some statement on that, but definitely a shame that it doesn't seem like there's been a whole lot of work since we've had that conversation with Randy Kelly about building connections within the people that are willing to spend their time working for the party. That's definitely a shame.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll get off this. I just wanted to kind of get your reaction because I know you listened. I know you were in the chat. I know the people who were talking and calling. But it seems to me that there is a dedicated core of people in Alabama who are committed to progressive social change, who are willing to do something about it. The fact that we had over 100 people come to the Troublemaker School, the fact that, folks like you and Big Mike and others are able to pull dozens of people to these events all over the state. There is a core group of people out there who are willing to do some work. I think there's a disconnect with that and the political party as a whole. And what I hope is that the dedicated core can start to build a coalition statewide, whether the ADP leadership is on board or not, but there has to be a coalition of working class people, a diverse coalition, if we're ever going to make any progress in the state. And I think we have some good, talented, organizing-minded folks who can put our heads together, develop a platform and a program that appeals to people, and get candidates that can advance that program. So I'll get off my soapbox there.
Yeah, and I would like to point out the people in the chat that were chatting in, that called in afters, those were all members of the Youth Caucus. So our caucus is all willing to put in the work. We have offered to take over social media accounts. We've offered to do those things. But so far, a place hasn't been made for us. So I think that's a big thing, is that if you want progress, everyone deserves a place. And I'm sorry, that is Everly who's trying to tell y'all hello.
Hey, Everly.
Hello. Yeah, well, and
growing like a weed.
Yeah, no kidding. Now Everly is the one that was born right before the strike began, right? Did we lose
That's
it?
Correct.
Oh,
She
okay.
was only 4 months old when we went on strike. So that's all she really knows is being on strike.
I couldn't imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just picturing her, the little baby that we met in Brookwood, last May, and now here she is. So it's definitely wild to think about. I was mentioning before you came on the air that Kim Kelly had a recent article out in Jezebel that I thought did a very good job highlighting you and your sisters who have been so involved in the strike. Is there any kind of anything to report to us now that we're at over day 600? I know you had International UMWA President Cecil Roberts in attendance recently, and the actions that y'all took. Anything to share with us about the state of the strike?
I would say definitely the actions are still being planned. That was just the start. We're planning on picking things back up. What people don't understand sometimes is they're like, well, why haven't you been doing this the whole time? Well, we've been under huge injunctions with massive penalties. That's like the reason why we didn't sit down in the road. It's because we were because of Alabama's unfriendly worker laws and the reason they don't want people to perform civil disobedience that brings change. We could have actually gone to jail for 30 days and had a $200,000 fine just for civil disobedience, just for a peaceful protest.
Right.
Protesting working conditions and freedom of speech could have gotten us put in jail for 30 days, which is absolutely insane that that's the state that we live in. So I think that's something people need to be aware of, that needs to change, that we can't be afraid because we're being threatened with absurd penalties for displaying our basic rights that should be constitutionally protected.
Absolutely. I mean, this is what's our state motto? We dare defend our rights.
Right. Yeah.
Well, Hayden and about 1,000 of her friends have tried to dare defend their rights.
Yeah,
and
the
we
state
say the state of
government
Alabama
is trying to stop them from doing
Right.
that. Yeah. Well,
And
let's.
I think with Jacob one time, to where when we were out doing a demonstration, to where one of the cops said, no, your freedom of speech only is valid based on time, place, and interest of the government. Is a video. We have him on video saying that. That's absolutely not what the Constitution says, but that's what we're up against here now.
It's probably the most honest answer he could have given you, though. in some ways.
Well, so, we appreciate that update on the strike, and you have been, and I'm sure you'll continue to keep us up to date on anything, and we'll try to make it out there as often as we can, especially when there's a big action. But the reason that I wanted to bring you on today mainly was in the other hat that you wear when you're not, keeping working to keep alive the longest ongoing strike in the country right now, which, I assume is just incredibly easy, and you've got lots of spare time from doing that. But in your other hat as a teacher here in Alabama, you said the other day on Twitter, we had some amazing discussion in my English 10 class yesterday. We are reading and analyzing Cesar Chavez's address to the Commonwealth Club of California, which led to a discussion and additional readings of how child labor is still happening in Alabama and the country today. And I thought that was fascinating that you were able to have that discussion with your kids and sophomores in high school. And so I thought that I was like, well, yeah, that would be a really good thing to talk to her about on the show. Talk about how her students received that. And so before we talk about their reaction to the piece, give us just like a synopsis, a SparkNotes version of the address to the Commonwealth of California. What was Cesar Chavez, a leader of the United Farm Workers Union? What was he trying to get across in that address?
So how we framed this whole unit in reading was we were looking at how an individual can change society, how an individual can come together with other individuals for a common purpose and make change. So we read the address, we broke it down into chunks, and what some of my students said that they took away from it as we were reading is that workers were taking the blame for everything, that workers were being exploited, workers were dying in the fields, but yet anytime anything happened, crops failed. Anytime the environment was questioned, that these growers would turn around and blame the workers, and they would be punished for that. To where, in fact, they were working with poor living conditions, and we broke it down that way. We had also, prior to this, had read the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire articles. We had also went and read the St. Petersburg Workmen's Petition that led to the Bloody Sunday Massacre. And then in correlation with this reading that we did with Cesar Chavez, we read the poem Immigrants in Our Own Land, which is Jimmy Baca's poem, where it talks about the dream of coming to America and creating this better life, and quickly seeing that that wasn't the case, that once you came here, things didn't get better. For most people, they got worse, that your conditions were actually worse than before. And for a lot of people, that led to incarceration. So we talked about how being incarcerated in the prison system played into you were either a worker in the field that was being treated basically like a slave, or you became incarcerated, in which case you were again treated as less than human, and how the dreams that those people had when they came here were the same, but the outcomes were drastically different. So I think what I wanted them to take from that is that they have the power to make those changes. When they see an injustice happening, that they have the voice to stand up and say something against it, that they don't have to be afraid. And I think it's important to note that I have a very diverse school to where I work, to where I do have a good amount of Hispanic students. I do have a good amount of Black students. I do have white students. So it's a very diverse makeup. And most of my students in class, when I asked them at the beginning, they want to go into the workforce. Some of them want to go to college. Most of them want to go into the workforce. So as a teacher, I feel like it's my job to teach them how to advocate for themselves, to teach them what their options are, to let them know about people that fought to give people the rights, to give people the workplace safeties, to give people what they have now, that those weren't always given, that people, no matter what, deserve the right to be treated as human beings. They deserve to have representation in their workplace. They deserve to have time with family. They deserve to live, not just survive.
And what was the response from the students? These are pretty young young folks, like when you're a sophomore in high school, you're 15, 16, I think is the age. And I don't know, when I was 15 or 16, I don't know how deeply I was thinking about these, serious issues. So what were their reactions to this unit in your class?
I would say this was one of the most engaging units that they were actually a part of the discussion, because a lot of these were like, well, I'm working right now at this fast food place and they don't let me off when I'm sick. And they threaten me if I don't. Well, that's not okay. They really can't do that. It kind of opened up those discussions on even what they're facing personally. And for some of my students, they're like, well, I know that these companies in town are hiring people and working them outside of the hours that they're supposed to. So if they're not supposed to do that, what can we do about it? But then the most meaningful to me was after class, and one of my students came up and gave me a hug and said, Ms. Wright, this is the first time anybody's ever taught something positive about someone from my culture. This is the first time anyone's ever had us read anything and talk about something to where someone that I can relate to, someone that comes from my same background, has made changes and helped people. And that to me was heartbreaking, that they are 16 years old and that up until now they didn't see a voice that was their voice, that it was something that they could represent, that they could strive to. Because she was like, I want to go to college. And she's like, in this reading, he talks about with all these injustices happening, that could never happen. And she said, but now it can. She said, so now I know that I have a place and that it's okay that all these things happened and are still happening. So I think that for me was the biggest reason. And that in itself would have been a reason I'm glad I taught the unit, that I'm glad we did those readings, because it gave those students a chance to see themselves in history, to see themselves in literature, to see that no matter what your background is, that you can make positive changes, that you can be and do whatever you want, that you're capable of anything.
I think that having a teacher like you would be really, really beneficial for so many people in Alabama, to be able to hear from, somebody who understands, the struggles of the working class and what they had to do to get there, and is interested in teaching about those struggles from history. I think that, for that, like, we just don't learn much about how working people changed history. Usually we hear about this or that president or this or that politician or CEOs or Rockefellers, right, or the great
man of history.
Yeah, J.P. Morgan. And I think that, reading that essay from Cesar Chavez, who, he was a union leader, but he was a worker before that, right? And I think that's I'm really glad that it seems like your students reacted positively to that.
And I know there's probably some people questioning, well, what standard was that? Well, now with the new standards for the state of Alabama, you're supposed to focus on literature and voices originating outside of the United States, to where I would really like to encourage teachers to think about using those immigrant voices, so the students still have that base to relate to. And those are really powerful. You can teach them in a way that not only gets them to understand standards like figurative language, repetition, point of view, purpose, tone, theme, but it also gives them the experience they need to be successful in life, because that's what our goal needs to be, to give them the tools they need to graduate and go into the workplace and decide if something is not right, if something is unsafe, to show them they have a voice. And what we ended up doing was, when we were talking about how they had 6-year-olds voting in elections, that was part of the Commonwealth, that the youngest workers they had actually voted in union elections were as young as 6 years old, because they were working on those farms.
Right.
So I just asked the question. I was like, well, can y'all think of any child labor happening now? And they were like, well, I know that some of us work and we have to get work permits. I said, well, what about kids working in other conditions? And they had no idea, because it hasn't been really widely put on the news or publicized. So we actually then pulled up and read the article about the Hyundai factory here in Alabama, getting caught using underage children in a factory setting. And they were appalled. They were like, how did that happen? How did no one know? They were like, why did no one that was an adult there that knew they were working with them say anything? So for a lot of the kids, they were angry because it clearly showed in that article that, oh yeah, I knew I was working next to a bunch of 15-year-olds.
Right.
But nobody did anything. So we talked about how dangerous it is to be complacent in your workplace. That how not wanting to stir the pot or not wanting or being afraid really to have a voice is damaging to everyone. So I think that they were really kind of surprised and shocked. And I heard them kind of talking about it in the hallway to other people. Like, hey, did you know here in Alabama at the Hyundai plant, they got caught with 15-year-olds working all night, you know?
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, definitely more productive, probably more productive conversations than children have in school hallways sometimes.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I got to say, I think it's fantastic as a former educator. I know that feeling you had when that girl gave you a hug after class, and that made it all worth it, all the time and energy you put into that. And I want to echo your sentiments. I want to encourage educators who may be listening to think outside the box, be bold in your choices, not just with the types of lessons you teach and the way you teach them, but with the text you're reading. Make sure it's reflecting the diversity of the students you're serving. And, I think there's an opportunity to do a lot while still teaching the standards. If you know what you're doing as a teacher, you can teach some pretty bold things and really shake people's mindsets and still be able to say, I'm teaching what the state of Alabama requires me to teach.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of teachers in Alabama, because of the environment we're in, self-censor. It's not so much that they're being told by a principal or a parent, you can't teach A, B, and C. That happens, unfortunately, more than it should. But I think a lot of times teachers they sense that environment and they're being a little cautious in what they teach and what they assign to their students to read. And so I think you've given us a great example of how you can be thoughtful, you can be engaging, you can meet students where they're at and get them to engage with content that is pretty deep, heavy material, but in a way that still works for them, in a way where they walked away knowing something more about the world and the society they live in and the society they're going to participate in. I think that's what it's all about, 100%. And you just make me miss teaching when I hear a story like that. Or when I hear some of the stories from my wife and how you can just really see a light bulb go off in a student's head, make them think a little differently about something, or, in the case of this student, feel seen and feel heard for the first time. That's huge. That's huge.
And I would love to give y'all kind of another update. After that reading, we actually read the graphic novel Mouse.
Okay.
That's what we read next. And I would love for people to understand graphic novels are valid literature. And another kind of wonderful moment in teaching is when you have kids you've never seen read for pleasure, asked to check out the second book from your classroom library. Yeah. I mean, I have 8 books, all 8 of those have been checked out, but they wanted to know more. The students were really engaged. They were like, well, they read about the Holocaust in a history book. That's not the same as actually kind of seeing a story told from someone's perspective. So I actually got with someone from Teen Screen. Sister Kip put me in touch with him. That's a UMWA member. And so next week when we come back, since they said they wanted to learn more about the Holocaust and what it meant to survive, they're actually going to come in and watch a documentary put on by Teen Screen. And then Suzanne, who's a Holocaust survivor, is actually going to Zoom in with them next week to talk about her experience in surviving Auschwitz and answer questions that the students have. So it's
That's
things like
awesome.
that get students engaged. It's that life experience of having someone come into the classroom that's willing to be like, okay, let me answer your questions. Let me tell you exactly what it's like from a personal experience. Because I can have them read from the textbooks all day long. That's not going to be nearly as valuable as having someone come in and tell their personal story. So I'm really excited for that. I thought, Adam, especially you, I thought would be really excited.
That is awesome. And I got to say, like, you know, Zoom has its problems, but like something like that to connect someone to a classroom in Brookwood, Alabama is just really, really cool. I think your kids are going to get a lot out of that, and I think it's great. They're already asking these questions and they're already interested in it. And I think you're right. Yeah, it's one thing to read about it, but it's another thing to actually relate to people on a human level and get in touch with that humanity. So I think that's just brilliant, and I really appreciate it. And if teachers are listening and they're interested in like these types of resources, you probably have some to share, Hayden. I know a couple I would share would be Zen Education Project. Great lessons. I mean, including fully built lesson plans, but a great selection of text, and Teaching for Change is another really good one. Teaching Tolerance, I think, has renamed itself in the last couple of years and is something else. But if you look for Teaching Tolerance, you can find it that way. But those were a couple recommendations I have. Zen Education Project in particular has labor history lesson plans. So history teachers, y'all don't do the labor movement justice. Most of them don't. So those are some resources I would encourage folks to check into. And even if you're not a teacher, if you're a parent, I mean, parents, we are the first teachers. And I think we would make a mistake if we assume that our kids are going to get everything they need to know at school.
Yeah.
As great as our schools are in certain ways. But so whether you're a parent or a teacher, talk about these things with your kids from an early age. Talk to them. What is a union? My daughter is in first grade. She does know what a union is. She knows what a strike is. She knows about justice on some level. And I think that's really important. So, Hayden, I really appreciate what you're doing, and I appreciate you being willing to share some of these ideas and hopefully inspire someone else to get creative. I know I've already texted my wife the text of the speech, so maybe her AP language class will be looking at that pretty soon.
Thanks, Hayden. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, folks. We've got a couple more topics to go into today. Let's check out what we've got. Several bosses that are really misbehaving here in Alabama and the South. And so we'll go through these stories here kind of quickly. And let's start off with this one from a cement maker. There's a cement maker in South Alabama. They are paying $100,000 in fines for air pollution, despite, quote, neither admitting nor denying the allegations in the settlement agreement. Because that's just something that you do. You know, you just, even though that, you know, you're not at fault, you just write $100,000 checks, right? Something that I do all the time. I mean, like, don't you just love how rich folks can write a check and make these problems go away? It's really great, I think. But even though they neither admit nor deny, quote unquote, the allegations in the actual case, strangely in their statement, though, they say this, quote, "We take responsibility for the actions, and in fact, since that time, we have taken specific actions to address fugitive dust emissions that result from offloading raw material from ships and barges, and developed a plan for addressing such emissions from around the plant to ensure future compliance." So,
okay. All right.
Even though they, quote, take responsibility for the, quote, actions, they then say later in the statement that they have no record of fugitive emission plumes on the dates alleged. And they've also not been able, quote, to conduct a timely investigation of those incidents, which were alleged to have happened like back in July and August and February. So I don't know why you haven't been able to conduct a timely investigation. Like, that seems like a you problem. So I don't know, just very, very weird. You know, they neither admit nor deny that the allegations happened, but they also take responsibility. I don't know. Super bungled statements here from this company. But this is the evidence that the investigators have pulled together in their case against this cement maker in South Alabama. Holcim US. Holcim US is the cement maker. On February 15th, an Alabama Department of Environmental Management, ADEM, inspector at the facility, like in person, reported, quote, significant fugitive emissions, unquote, from multiple sources at the plant. So this is an actual state investigator on site, on location, saying that they're seeing this in person. On July 27th, ADEM personnel at a nearby facility reported seeing, quote, a fugitive emission plume from the facility that was clearly visible from a distance. So here they're again able to see this in person. On August 3rd, ADEM received a complaint from the public, quote, with pictures showing a large dust plume over the facility. So now we've got 2 eyewitness accounts from state investigators, and now we've got photographic evidence from the public. And then on August 8th, ADEM said it received a, quote, similar complaint for dust plumes at the facility on July 5th and August 3rd. So, seems, pretty conclusive that even though the company is saying that they've got no evidence for that this happened, it seems like the state of Alabama does. But the state of Alabama is allowing them to get away with just writing the check and nothing else, no official admission of guilt or anything like that, because and this is coming from the Alabama Department of Environmental Management. The department has agreed to the terms of this consent order in an effort to resolve the alleged violations cited herein without the unwarranted expenditure of state resources. In further prosecuting the above violations, the order states, the department has determined that the terms contemplated in this consent order are in the best interest of the citizens of Alabama. So basically, what the Alabama Department of Environmental Management is saying, that in order to save money, they're not going to prosecute these people for polluting our environment, for polluting our air with eyewitness testimony, photographic evidence from multiple instances. Even though they've got all this evidence against the company, they're not going to prosecute them to save money. To save money. And I mean, working people can't get away with that, obviously. Right. Think about if the settlement is $100,000. How much damage did they actually do? Exactly.
If you could put a quantity on the pollution,
it would be so much more than $100,000. But imagine, I think an equivalent thing would be like, imagine you as a working person go up to like some rich person that lives in downtown Huntsville and, bust up their $100,000 car. And then you say, whoops, sorry, I'll write you, $500 for a settlement, and I'm not going to admit guilt. Like here's $500. I neither admit nor deny the allegations. Go away. Of course you couldn't do that, but that's what these people are getting away with all the time, because that's what $100,000 is to these big companies, right? They write $100,000 checks. They write $1 million checks with the ease that you and I, buy like a microwave or food for our dog, right? So, I don't know. Better than nothing, I guess, but...
Yeah, ADEM leaves a lot to be desired, both in their pursuit of regulation, their punishment mechanisms for polluters. Again, as we mentioned last week when we were talking about Toyota Mazda, these companies, they know it's open season down here in Alabama.
Obviously.
They know they can pollute the air, the water, the ground.
And if the settlement for the Alabama Department of Environmental Management, these people are not gung-ho, maybe some of the individuals in ADEM are.
But as an institution.
Right. ADEM is not this gung-ho environmental organization.
Generally speaking, I would say it's pro-polluter.
So for ADEM to say that, look, you need to give us something because this is pretty bad, right?
Right.
You need to at least give us $100,000 to make this go away. I mean, this is really, really bad stuff for a state department in Alabama to be requiring this of a company. Really, really bad stuff from Wholesome US is
Gotta
maybe
love
it's
that name.
maybe it's Holcim. I don't know. Here's another one. Keystone Foods, an Alabama food processing plant, is paying $60,000 to settle a federal lawsuit against them for pregnancy discrimination. Before we go any farther here, anytime we talk about pregnant workers, I always want to make sure to highlight the fact that Alabama has no state-level protections against pregnancy discrimination. We've got no state-level protections for pregnant workers. If it was up to the folks in Montgomery, it would be fine to discriminate you because you're pregnant or because you could become pregnant. A Democrat last session tried to remedy that by passing a Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, but that was shot down by the Republicans, who are very pro-life and pro-family and pro-mother, apparently. This came after a former employee was offered a job and had that job offer retracted after the company found, through a records review, that this former employee had previously filed a complaint with the EEOC against them for pregnancy discrimination. So this is a former employee who worked for them before and alleged pregnancy discrimination before. Then for whatever reason, she was separated from the company. I'm not sure if she left or if she was fired or laid off or whatever. But then she came back and she had a job offer, and that job offer was retracted after the company saw that, oh, this is a rabble-rouser. This is somebody that's accused us of pregnancy discrimination in the past. So they retracted the offer. And so the former employee, through the EEOC, filed a lawsuit against them, and now they're having to pay $60,000 because not only is it illegal to discriminate against workers on the basis of pregnancy or their ability to become pregnant, it is also illegal to retaliate against them for utilizing their right to seek a redress for discrimination. It's illegal to blacklist people. It's illegal for companies to blacklist you if you've made discrimination complaints in the past. So also, in addition to paying the $60,000 settlement, Keystone is now under a federal consent decree for 2 years prohibiting them from discriminating and retaliating against employees. And according to AL.com, Keystone will have to issue a written statement to all employees at its Eufaula facility stating that it will not retaliate against employees or job applicants who engage in protected activity. So now would be a good time for them to unionize if they don't have a union, I think.
Absolutely. And also a good reminder that if you ever face retaliation for an EEOC claim, that is its own EEOC claim.
Yep.
And you should pursue it. And you have 180 days, by and large, to do that. It's been a while since we've done like a little EEOC training session. We might have to do one of those soon. Given some of the cases we've been talking about lately. Yeah, exactly. Here's another one, some more bosses behaving badly. They're just on a roll. Yeah, bosses behaving badly. I mean, that could be a regular segment, I think.
That could be the whole show. So just a couple of days ago, OSHA announced that it would be hitting Dollar General stores in Alabama, Florida, and Georgia with another $2.77 million in fines. This comes only 1 month after an announcement that they would hit the same stores with yet another $1.68 million in fines. These two recent collections of fines over the past month bring the total fines for safety violations since just 2017, over the past 5 years, to $12.3 million for Dollar General stores in Florida, Alabama, and Georgia. $12.3 million in OSHA fines. I mean, this is like, folks, OSHA does not go around. I mean, the same with ADEM. I mean, even the federal government, they're going to be a little bit better under the current administration than the state government, obviously. But even the federal government, they're not going around here, and since 2017, right? So part of this was under Trump's OSHA. They're not going around giving out these fines willy-nilly. And now Dollar General is up to $12.3 million. From AL.com's reporting on this, this means that Dollar General now qualifies for the Severe Violator Enforcement Program. That means that workplace safety citations can bring punitive actions that reach into corporate offices and bring the federal courts into play. I'm not sure exactly mechanically and logistically what that means, but it doesn't sound great for the corporate executives at Dollar General. This recent round of investigations found that fire extinguishers had not been labeled, mounted, or available. There were some instances where there was not a fire extinguisher available. Boxes were stored in front of electrical panels, creating a greater fire hazard. Some staircases that needed handrails did not have them, and unused openings in electrical cabinets were not kept closed, creating an electrocution hazard. Before this round of investigations, other investigations found that emergency exits were locked at Dollar General stores. Employees were under threat of being hit by falling boxes of goods. And again, fire extinguishers were not readily available. So,
glad to see a little bit of accountability there for Dollar General. I mean, they pop up all over. It seems like a new one opens up. Between my drive to Athens to Huntsville, I feel like I run across a new Dollar General every month or so. They're opening up everywhere. They crowd out local businesses. They pay totally crappy wages.
Yeah.
And oftentimes tend to prey on more vulnerable type workers. So yeah, I really I find Dollar General to be a pretty repulsive company.
Yeah. From AL.com's reporting again, quote, Dollar General has shown a pattern of alarmingly willful disregard for federal safety standards, choosing to place profits over their employees' safety and well-being, said Assistant Secretary for Occupational Safety and Health, Doug Parker. Neighborhood stores exist to support the needs of their communities, the same communities in which many Dollar General employees live, and that support must include following laws designed to keep workers safe from preventable injuries or worse. So, glad to see some amount of accountability for Dollar General. And the last of these bad boss stories that we had lined up here was with Krispy Kreme. Krispy Kreme Donut Corporation has agreed to pay $1.1 million in back wages and liquidated damages to 516 workers to resolve overtime violations in multiple locations found as part of a U.S. Department of Labor investigation.
Wow.
What started as an investigation into one location in Kentucky soon expanded into an investigation of every Krispy Kreme store nationwide after investigators at that Kentucky location found that violations were systemic and widespread. Like there was a protocol for doing this. And that protocol was that these overtime violations, they happened because Krispy Kreme was systemically and artificially lowering the rate of pay for its employees for its calculations of their overtime rate, right? So they're paying them their standard rate, but then for the purposes of calculating their overtime pay, they were not taking into account everything, and they were artificially lowering their standard rate of pay so that 1.5 times, once you go over 40 hours a week, that time and a half, that was lower than actual time and a half, right? So they ended up paying these employees less than they were owed under the law for working over 40 hours a week. And so these 516 employees, obviously, the payouts for each individual one is going to be a little bit different, but averaged out, it's like $2,000 for each one. So some are going to get more, some are going to get less, but that's a nice little paycheck, and hopefully and Krispy Kreme is supposed to be, doing the right thing going forward. They agreed to follow the law as a result of this, so we'll see if that actually happens. But
yeah,
there's a little more accountability for bad bosses. So glad to see that.
Yeah, I do love some Krispy Kreme donuts. I do not love cheating bosses.
No, absolutely not. So, Adam, let's wrap up with some November labor history.
Let's do it, and we'll call it a day. I know it's Iron Bowl Saturday. For some of you listening, that means absolutely nothing. For some of you, it's a big deal.
That means everything.
Right. Yeah. For some of you, it probably means too much. Maybe if you're not our listener, but I'm sure if you're tuning in from the state of Alabama, you know it's a big deal today. And we just came off the Thanksgiving holiday. Again, I hope everyone had a good one. Shout out to all the airline employees this week. I know you're dealing with a lot of extra, so that's why I'm wearing my Delta AFA button today. So as we close out the month of November, I wanted to take a few minutes to share some of the November anniversaries in labor history, as well as important days of recognition for social justice. I compiled this information primarily from the 2022-23 edition of Planning to Change the World, a plan book for social justice educators. So, should have mentioned that in chat with Hayden Wright. The Planning to Change the World planner, excellent resource if you're interested in having conversations with young people about social justice. So this excellent planner is published by the Education for Liberation Network, and I also wanted to give a shout out to Zen Education Project, which does some really cool This Day in History, hashtag TDIH, This Day in History posts. So let's get started. November is National American Indian Heritage Month, which recognizes the significant contributions of Native Americans. So it's fitting that we next mention November 2nd as the 50th anniversary of Native American protesters' occupation of the Bureau of Indian Affairs headquarters. The Trail of Broken Treaties protests aimed at redressing grievances of the Native American population for centuries of ill treatment by the U.S. government. When they arrived in D.C. and found no government official willing to discuss their 20-point manifesto, the protesters took over the BIA building, occupying it for a week. Government infiltrators incited violence, which resulted in significant damage to the building as well as to the public perception of the Native Americans' cause. Always got to watch out for saboteurs. November 3rd was the 50th anniversary of New York protests of the Rehabilitation Act's veto. Activists for disabled citizens blocked traffic in Manhattan to protest President Richard Nixon's veto of the Rehabilitation Act, which would have provided a wide range of assistance for people with disabilities. One group of protesters gathered outside the Roosevelt Hotel, where the committee to re-elect Nixon was located. They entered the building, staging a sit-in, demanding that Nixon debate them on the issue. Now, obviously, that didn't happen, but others protested outside the federal building, and it is remembered as a major day of action for people with disabilities. On November 5th, in 1867, delegates gathered in Montgomery, Alabama, to draft a new state constitution, as required by the Reconstruction Acts. Prior to the Reconstruction era, no Southern state had a state-financed public education system, even for whites. Alabama's new constitution established a centralized board of education and mandated that schools receive 20% of state revenue. By 1871, nearly 55,000 African American and 87,000 white children were attending public schools. The advances from the Constitution ended, in Alabama and elsewhere, with the brutal attacks on Reconstruction and the rewrite of Alabama's state constitution in 1875, and then again in 1901. But a lot of folks do not know how Reconstruction truly changed the game when it comes to public education. November 6th was the 10th anniversary of the legalization of same-sex marriage in multiple states. On November 6, 2012, voters in Maine, Maryland, and the District of Columbia passed referenda enabling same-sex couples to legally marry. In Minnesota, voters rejected a constitutional amendment barring same-sex marriage. These ballot measures marked the first time that same-sex marriage was approved by the popular vote rather than by legislative or court action. It was a clear sign that the tide had turned in voter sentiment on the issue. And it's sad to think that in 2022, there are elites with power who want to move backwards on this and so many other issues of civil rights. A lot was happening November 8th in history and today. November 8th was Election Day. All 435 seats in the House of Representatives, 35 Senate seats, 36 state and 3 territorial governorships, and numerous state and local government offices were all on the ballot, as were several ballot measures in states like Illinois that codified union rights, and in Tennessee that unfortunately enshrined right to work in their state constitution. November 8th was also the 70th anniversary of the Mayabuye Uprising. As part of the defiance campaign led by the African National Congress, the uprising took place at a beer hall in Kimberley to protest South African apartheid. 13 protesters were killed and 78 others were seriously wounded when government security forces opened fire on the protesters. The defiance campaign was a series of acts of civil disobedience to protest the apartheid regime, similar to the acts of defiance of Black Americans protesting Jim Crow. Also on November 8th, but 130 years ago, 30,000 factory and dock workers staged the 1892 New Orleans General Strike, demanding union recognition, closed shops, wage increases, and more. They were joined by non-industrial laborers such as musicians, clothing workers, clerks, utility workers, streetcar drivers, and printers. Most importantly, African American and white workers united despite active attempts to divide the workers on racial lines. November 9th was the birthday of abolitionist Elijah Parrish Lovejoy, who lived from 1802 to 1837. Lovejoy, a white Presbyterian minister, was the editor of the St. Louis Observer, which was an abolitionist anti-Jacksonian paper. After his printing press had been destroyed for a third time because of his critical opinions on slavery, Lovejoy moved to Alton, Illinois, where he started another abolitionist paper called the Alton Observer. In November 1837, a mob attacked the paper's warehouse and Lovejoy was murdered. November 10th, in 1898, white supremacists murdered African Americans in Wilmington, North Carolina, and deposed the elected Reconstruction-era government in a coup d'etat. After the riot, thousands of black citizens fled. In 1900, the North Carolina legislature effectively stripped African Americans of the vote through the grandfather clause and ushered in the worst of the Jim Crow laws in North Carolina. November 11th was Veterans Day, originally intended to mark the end of World War I on the 11th day of the 11th month, but which now celebrates all those who have served in the U.S. Armed Forces. November 11th was also the 30th anniversary of the publishing of Race and the Incidence of Environmental Hazards. This volume of 16 articles, written primarily by scholars of color, exposes the facts of environmental inequity and its consequences. It is only the second book of its kind, following Dr. Robert Bullard's 1990 Dumping in Dixie, which expanded on his 1983 paper, Solid Waste and the Black Houston Community. And when I was in Houston a couple weeks ago, I was lucky enough to hear Dr. Bullard speak. He's considered kind of the intellectual grandfather of the environmental justice movement, and really, really appreciate the work he has done to tie in the ways race and pollution and environmental destruction are all tied together. Race, class, pollution, the environment, there are a lot of connections there, and he's been doing just amazing work over the past several decades documenting it. On November 13th, 1953, during the height of the McCarthy era, Robin Hood and his band of merry outlaws made headlines. Mrs. White of the Indiana Textbook Commission called for a ban of Robin Hood in all school books for promoting communism because he stole from the rich to give to the poor. In response to White's attempts at censorship, as well as the larger McCarthy witch hunt it was part of, 5 students from Indiana University at Bloomington started the Green Feather movement. They had been meeting in a religious fellowship at a Baptist church and were moved by their faith to take action. So, lest you think the ridiculous book-banning cultural wars of today are something new, they're not. We're still living in the Red Scare, folks. November 15th was the 100th anniversary of the Workers' Massacre in Guayaquil, Ecuador. After a 3-day general strike, which left the town without water, electricity, and adequate food, Ecuador's president and the unions came to an agreement to end the strike and accede to the workers' demands. Security forces, however, didn't get the news and opened fire on the unarmed protesters, killing at least 300. The next day, the settlement was signed, but the damage was done, and relations among labor, management, and the government were irrevocably broken. On November 16, 1989, 6 Jesuit scholars and priests, their housekeeper, and her daughter were murdered by the U.S.-backed, trained, and equipped military in El Salvador. The priests were internationally recognized scholars who wrote and spoke extensively about the need for peace and the root causes of the war in El Salvador. They were among the 75,000 people killed during this period. November 17th is International Students' Day, an international observance and celebration of student community, multiculturalism, and inclusivity. It was originally intended to commemorate the storming of Czech universities by Nazi Germany, and colleges and universities now mark it as a celebration of their international students. November 19th, in 1915, the state of Utah executed Joe Hill, labor organizer, songwriter, and member of the Industrial Workers of the World, IWW. Joe Hill became famous around the world after a Utah court convicted him of murder. Even before the international campaign to have his conviction reversed, Joe Hill was well known on picket lines and at workers' rallies as the author of popular labor songs and as an IWW agitator. November 20th is the Transgender Day of Remembrance. This day is set aside to memorialize those who were killed because of anti-transgender hatred. In November 1919, in Bogalusa, Louisiana, agents of the Great Southern Lumber Company formed a gang to threaten African-American labor organizer Saul Dacus. He was trying to form a union for black laborers at the sawmill under very dangerous conditions. On November 21st, company gunmen and members of the Self-Preservation and Loyalty League, the SPLL, showed up at Dacus's home. He and his family survived the shootout that evening. The next day, on November 22nd in 1919, Dacus bravely walked through town, accompanied by white supporters and allies in the labor movement. Determined to undermine any efforts at interracial solidarity, the Great Southern Lumber Company gang murdered 4 of those white allies, including the American Federation of Labor District Representative. Dacus and his family were able to escape to New Orleans. The Bogalusa Massacre is an example of the violence interracial labor organizing experienced from racist anti-labor forces in the early 20th century. Yet another example is on November 23, 1887, when the Louisiana militia, aided by bands of prominent white citizens, shot and killed 30 to 60 unarmed striking black sugar workers in what became known as the Thibodeau Massacre. Black Louisiana sugarcane workers, in cooperation with the racially integrated Knights of Labor, had gone on strike at the beginning of November 1887 over their meager pay issued in company scrip, not cash. The scrip was redeemable only at the company's store, where excessive prices were charged, and they routinely ripped off the workers. This was part of the violent end to the Reconstruction era of the United States. It was also a devastating attack on organized labor in the South. November 24th is Thanksgiving, also known as a day of mourning among some indigenous communities. And November 24th was also the 10th anniversary of the Tazreen fashion factory fire in Bangladesh. The fire caused at least 117 deaths and injuries to more than 200 workers, making it the deadliest factory fire in Bangladesh history. More than 4 million Bangladeshi, most of them young women, work in garment factories for less than $40 a month under extremely unsafe conditions. When fire broke out, managers ordered workers to keep working. The exit doors were locked, and the windows on the lower floors had security bars, trapping workers inside. I want to send our remembrance to all these workers and so many others around the world. International solidarity is a must. November 25th, yesterday, Black Friday. It's known in some circles as Buy Nothing Day, an international day of protest against consumerism, strategically celebrated on Black Friday, the busiest shopping day of the year in the U.S., which also makes it a day that features a lot of strikes for that very reason. I want to take this moment to give a shout out to all of the folks in retail and service industries. Whether you're at a restaurant, a mall, a big box store, or a small shop, shout out to all of you working through the holiday madness. You are on the front lines of America's consumerist spectacle, and of course, virus transmission, we should not forget. You deal with some of the worst aspects of our fellow humanity, and you work while others spend time with friends and family. You deserve a raise, you deserve a union, you deserve a contract that guarantees due process and health care and retirement and more. Thanks for all you do, those of you working in these sectors, and please continue to organize. November 26th is the birthday of abolitionist and women's rights advocate Sarah Grimke. Sarah Grimke and her sister Angelina rebelled against their father, a North Carolina slaveholder. They were staunch abolitionists and women's rights advocates, speaking out publicly at a time when most women often didn't. The Grimke sisters were the first women to speak before a state legislature as representatives of the American Anti-Slavery Society. Their ideas were controversial to many in their community, to say the least. Angry mobs burned their speeches, and their writings were burned in protest. But I think it's worth remembering the Grimkes and so many others who stood strong in the abolitionist movement at a time of great pressure against them. And while we can reflect on the many tragedies of American history, it's also worth remembering the many, many good people who fought against them. And on that note, November 26th is the 110th anniversary of the release of the Lawrence textile strikers. Joseph James Eder, Arturo Giovannetti, and Joseph Caruso were arrested for the murder of a bystander at the 1912 Lawrence textile strike. They were released after international groups protested and went on strike in solidarity. Despite evidence that the men were not present during the killing of Ana Lopezzo, they were accused of murder and kept in metal cages throughout their trial. It is still unknown whether Lopezzo was killed by strikers or police. November 29th is the 10th anniversary of the United Nations approval of Palestine as an observer state. The UN upgraded Palestine's status in the international body from observer to observer state, and the adoption of the resolution was timed to coincide with the observance of the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. The member states that voted for the change did so to express, quote, the urgent need for the resumption and acceleration of peace negotiations. Among the 9 countries voting against the resolution, unsurprisingly, were Canada, the United States, and Israel. And finally, it was 105 years ago this month when the Bolshevik Revolution broke out in Russia. The Bolsheviks led by Vladimir Lenin stormed the palace and toppled the provisional government of Alexander Kerensky, which itself had only been established earlier in 1917 after the hated Tsar was toppled in the February Revolution. Of course, due to the differences in calendars, the February and October revolutions in 1917 Russia took place in March and November on our calendars. So whatever one wants to think about the Russian Revolution, the many revolutions, and the brutal civil war that followed, there's no doubt these events shaped the course of the 20th century and beyond. So, that's all I have for November's important holidays, anniversaries, and days of recognition, days of working class history.
Thanks for that, Adam. And with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the show. We're going to be working on this week some pre-tape stuff because I'm going to be on vacation next week. I think Ben's going to be out of town.
Yeah. We're going to probably have pre-recorded episode next week. Working on some guests. We have some great guests lined up. Some have had to back out for different reasons. So looking forward to it though. We'll come up with something that I think you'll enjoy. If you have any suggestions and feedback, of course, we always appreciate that. If you got guest ideas or topics you would like to hear us talk about, always feel free to send that in. We really do appreciate that. So stay tuned for that.
And we'll see you sort of next week.
Solidarity, y'all.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you.